Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us to warmly welcome our guest of honor this morning, His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah, Deputy Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Malaysia, and Sultan of Perak. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Good morning, Your Royal Highness. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome one and all, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Day 2 at the International Conference of Cohesive Societies 2025. Much has happened yesterday, Diana. Let's bring them through this.
That's right. In the morning, if you recall, on day 1, Singapore's President Tharman Shanmugaratnam presented his opening address. And the key takeaway really was the President's analogy of multiculturalism with batik fabric, which many of us here will be very familiar with. The batik multiculturalism should be like the batik, which is a single piece of cloth that is woven together to create a motif. On the other hand, the quilt, if you like, is made up of different pieces of fabric stitched together. As you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, however strong your stitches are, when a society is under duress, there is a chance of the stitches coming apart. So that was a very nice headlining analogy there. And then we had the special presentation, if you recall, and it was focused on unpacking multiculturalism. And my key takeaway from that really is that each society must seek its own ways to foster cohesion because, well, it's unique and the contexts are unique as well. And in our first plenary, our speakers delve a little bit deeper to talk about what it takes really to get there, multiculturalism. And we spoke about the need for strong institutions, trust, as well as, very important to me personally, equitable participation.
That happened all in the morning, and after lunch, all of our delegates took part in breakout sessions and skills workshops where all of us understood and covered topics, understanding the role of history, of course, in managing diverse societies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, within that as well, it was underpinned the reason and the importance of respect. And of course, success as well, right in there. It was a very busy day 1 indeed. And day 2 is going to be an exciting program as well.
We will begin with a keynote address by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah, Deputy Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Malaysia, and Sultan of Perak. Your Royal Highness, please. Let's give him a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, a very good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here today as we consider a pressing challenge: how to navigate the rising tides of uncertainty that define our age. Before I begin, I want to offer my heartfelt thanks to 2 individuals whose leadership has shaped both the purpose and the spirit of this international gathering. To President Halimah Yacob, whose vision brought the International Conference on Cohesive Societies into being. This conference is her brainchild, and it is a privilege for us all to continue the endeavor she set in motion, with gratitude for the foresight that continues to guide us. And to President Tharman Shanmugaratnam for his insightful address yesterday, and I was very touched by his gracious words about my own work. And today, I hope to reinforce and build on the important themes he so clearly articulated as we begin to chart the complexities of uncertainty. This uncertainty is not merely a temporary squall. Uncertainty is the condition under which we now sail, and this storm is likely to be with us for some time to come. The 2022 United Nations Human Development Report describes our current predicament as an uncertainty complex, a confluence of destabilizing global pressures, sweeping social transformations, and deepening political polarization. We are being tested not by a single crisis, but an overwhelming, sometimes frightening interplay of conditions, whipping up into a perfect storm. New chapters in the narrative of global fragmentation are added by the week, day, sometimes it seems by the hour. The COVID-19 pandemic lent us a new norm of closed borders and social distancing, and a me-first mindset among countries, communities, and individuals. We have seen war return to Europe and West Asia. Food and energy systems are fragile, vulnerable to both geopolitics and climate change. Climate extremes have intensified with record heat, flooding, wildfires, and loss of biodiversity. And trust in governments, media, experts, politicians, and perhaps most sadly, each other has eroded alarmingly. Meanwhile, technologies we barely understood 5 short years ago, at the start of that same pandemic, are reshaping how we live, work, relate, play, and govern. Perhaps, most extraordinarily, all of this innovation in digital connectivity is unfolding against a backdrop of growing alienation, polarization, and loneliness. So let me introduce 3 complex interlocking factors that have fueled uncertainty and challenged social cohesion. First, the digital transformation of our society. Second, the dynamics of human migration. And third, the uneven economic impacts of globalization. Let's start with what I would call the paradox of digital societies. We live in the most connected era in human history. over 5 billion people now have access to the internet. Digital platforms shape public discourse and private thought. The impact on our economies, our politics, and even on our minds is transformative. The pandemic was a watershed moment in our living history, not least in how it accelerated our virtual connectedness. It brought wide-ranging digital communities into our very living rooms. We conducted schooling, office work, legal trials, and endless group quizzes on screens. The potential for simpler, more streamlined communication exploded into public consciousness. Our expanding virtual worlds promised increased inclusion and accessibility, and a tangible sense of a shared global experience like never before. And it was a very human experience. Social cohesion was reshaped by a dynamic online global community, one held together by innovations both marvelous and challenging. Digitalization has brought knowledge to our fingertips and given rise to new forms of solidarity and community. Online, people are exploring identity in freer, more fluid ways. Digital society also has fantastic scope to amplify the voice of marginalized communities. Take, for instance, movements such as Black Lives Matter or Me Too, which have brought systemic issues of abuse and inequality to the forefront of international discussion and rallied people across race, gender, and borders. People can connect with others all over the planet, forming communities not limited by geography or ethnicity, but united by shared values and causes. We are fostering a kind of global empathy, a sense of collective responsibility. We can see this in globally coordinated environmental protection campaigns and anti-war protests. The cohesive potential of this digital society is truly exciting. Yet, we are also entering a digital disruption age. The multiple benefits from this relentless digitalization of our lives, unfortunately, come at considerable cost. Our digital spaces, which should be so good at opening doors and minds, are instead responsible for closing them. The very technologies that promise inclusion can entrench exclusion. Our information ecosystems have become battlegrounds. Algorithms have the unfortunate habit of trapping us in digital echo chambers, feeding prejudice and starving nuance. This results in fragmentation, a kind of online tribalism, if you will. Information, while accessible, is becoming decentralized. Online hate rises, as does the spread of conspiracy theories, the propagation of extremist ideologies, and even violence. And with truth itself now up for grabs, with the rise of fake news, trust in institutions and in each other breaks down. The very real dangers of this were realized last summer in the United Kingdom, in the race riots that followed the tragic murders in Southport. The fabric of our social cohesion is being unraveled in the digital realm. And so, it is there also that we must focus our efforts to weave it back together. Let me now turn to international migration. Migration is one of the oldest human responses to uncertainty. People move in search of safety, opportunity, and dignity. They always have, but never in such numbers. According to the United Nations, as of last year, the global number of international migrants had almost doubled compared with 1990, from 154 million to 304 million. It could hit 1 billion by 2050. Climate change, conflict, and economic and political stability are forcing masses of people to move, often faster than host countries can adapt. These forces are rewriting the geography of human life. They challenge not only our infrastructure, but also our compassion. Sudden demographic changes can trigger backlash, especially in communities who are unused to diversity. Extremist voices love to claim that multiculturalism has failed. Minority communities are made to feel unwelcome, even threatened, because of their religious customs or the color of their skin. And this in turn fosters insularity in those communities, an unwillingness or inability to integrate, an us versus them mentality on both sides. Isolated events are turned into sweeping generalizations, feeding fears about so-called culture dilution. And because multiculturalism is so often tangled up with immigration, it ends up being framed as a threat to national identity. And of course, no one ever quite agrees on what this national identity actually is. But that is a discussion for another conference. The challenge is worsened if people feel institutions are not on their side. Minorities may feel unheard, majorities overlooked. Populists often put across unsubstantiated stereotypes of minorities and migrants, presenting a false and negative picture of them as benefit seekers and criminals. They are certainly not reporting their important positive contributions to the economy and the citizens' well-being. We've all seen violence or crime being wrongly blamed on whole communities, the flames of prejudice being fanned by the press. And social media, with its penchant for misinformation, populist clamor, and partisan biases, magnifies tensions and undermines social cohesion in nations with diverse or migrant populations. And as global crises continue to escalate, so too will migration. So, what can we do as a global community? We must work together to find homes for those who have lost theirs. Try to alleviate the strain on countries that are overwhelmed. We must be welcoming to those we can accommodate. And we must strive to tackle the root causes that drive people from their homes in the first place. Meanwhile, at national level, governments must work harder to foster inclusion and integration, and to build harmony and understanding between diverse communities. It is a challenge that governments cannot afford to ignore. The consequences of a fractured society are severe. In my home country of Malaysia, we are all too acutely aware of the way in which a lack of social cohesion lowers resilience, which is why we have placed racial harmony at the center of our Rukun Negara, our Declaration of National Principles. These words affirm that Malaysia, and I quote, nurtures the ambitions of achieving a more perfect unity among the whole of her society, creating a just society where the prosperity of the country can be enjoyed together, unquote. We have striven to celebrate the diversity of race, religion, and culture that is so integral to our country. I firmly believe that that is one of our most precious assets, making us stronger, happier, and more prosperous as a nation. And of course, it makes us better at navigating uncertain times. Later this morning, we will hear about this year's Southeast Asian Social Cohesion Radar. The findings of the last survey conducted in 2022 show that the majority felt there was a strong social cohesion in the region, with Singapore and Malaysia near the top of the list. We should take pride from this strength, evidenced even in the context of the pandemic, as tension and mistrust increased across the globe. Here in ASEAN, we have worked hard to sow the seeds of social cohesion, and that work is bearing some fruit. It stands out that of all the factors that pointed to social cohesion in that 2022 radar study, the most significant were grouped under the heading social relations. This describes participants' ability to trust in other people, the strength of their social networks, their perception of the acceptance of diversity. Interpersonal trust was found to be more important for cohesion than trust in institutions, social rules, civic participation, and even in the perception of fairness. Social cohesion is built from the ground up, on the foundation of humanity, and we must not take it for granted, nor stop striving for improvement. It starts small, with everyday interactions. The friendly word, the favor offered, the meal shared. What then is the core foundation to foster this trust? I believe a core foundation of social cohesion is simply to be a good neighbor. And it seems highly fitting that we reflect on that ideal for a moment. As a Malaysian, I am proud to call Singapore my neighbor, and I value the close bond that we share. Yet, elsewhere in the world, at this very moment, countries are turning on their neighbors. The very worst of the international violence we have witnessed in recent years, and even today, have been perpetrated across borders. The backlash against multiculturalism in many countries means that some communities no longer feel welcome in their own hometowns. Far from being friends or allies, neighbors have become enemies. Of course, behind every movement of people is a wider movement of capital, labor, and power. And so we turn to the third key dynamic, globalization. Since World War II, and especially since the 1980s onwards, trade liberalization, that is, removing barriers to trade, has been a crucial driver of development progress and of bringing nations closer together. The push for open markets and international rules help shift the world away from isolation and toward cooperation. And more recently, the rise of digital communication has supercharged global trade in services, connecting economies in ways we could not have imagined a few decades ago. Globalization has brought immense benefits: higher incomes, reduced poverty, and narrowed gaps between countries. But these benefits have not been evenly distributed. Within nations, it has been a different story, one of winners and losers. Some people, often those in struggling regions, in lower skilled jobs, have lost out, while others, especially the highly educated, and those working in thriving global cities, such as here in Singapore, London, or New York, reap the rewards. The rise of a small, multi-billionaire elite have led some to contend that today's rich are living through a new gilded age, exceeding even the excesses of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with enormous riches and power heavily concentrated, especially in the top 1%. Inequality has deepened further since the pandemic. Between 2020 and 2022, nearly 2/3 of all new wealth created globally went to the richest 1%, while nearly 2/3 while nearly the bottom half of the world's population, nearly 4 billion people, receive just 2%. Moreover, the extremes of inequality enable the ultra-rich to fund political influence through lobbying, political financing, and their control of traditional and social media. Such vast inequalities impede social mobility, intensify economic insecurity, weaken social cohesion, and eventually can ignite social conflict. So while globalization has brought unprecedented prosperity, there has been, as observed by the famous Oxford economist Sir Paul Collier, a contrary process, a widening patchwork of places and communities that have fallen behind. In some countries, the successful have even seemed to disregard left behind people, places, and communities, all subject to political neglect. This is another factor in the rise of nationalist politics and populist politicians. Where vast inequality exists, populist movements and protectionist politics soon follow, with both local and international consequences. Both international institutions and national governments have failed to adequately address deep spatial inequalities within countries. They have often been slow to set up mechanisms to compensate losers or put in place social protection systems to prevent or alleviate poverty. The upshot has been a pushback on globalization at national policy level, driven by the growing antipathy to it by those left behind. So what does it mean to navigate uncertainty wisely? Amid such upheaval, the pool of familiar certainties can feel deceptively comforting. There is a temptation to retreat into narrower circles of identity, to hoard privileges, and to romanticize a past that, if we are honest and strip away nostalgia, never was. But I am confident that the answer to uncertainty is not withdrawal. Navigating these uncharted waters demands resilience and reinvention. But most importantly, it will take collaboration and collective courage. I would like to offer 4 guiding principles. First, rebuild trust. We must reinvest in the social contract. We need transparent institutions, accountable leadership, and civic spaces where people feel seen and heard. Rebuilding trust means investing in media literacy, digital integrity, and honest communication, not just control. Second, prioritize equity. Social, economic, and ecological justice must be at the heart of policy. We must expand our understanding of equity to include not only disparities among people, but also the imbalances between people and planet. A just and resilient future means closing human gaps and healing our relationship with the planet. Third, embrace pluralism. I believe social cohesion does not demand uniformity. It requires the respectful accommodation of diverse culture, religion, identity, and origin, as well as of social and political perspectives. It is about recognizing human dignity and opportunity in accepting differences, reframing how we think about migration, and rejecting fear-based politics. Trust in our shared humanity is fundamental. Compassion and love for your neighbor is a value taught by every major religion and philosophy, as represented here in our conference. And in our connected world, it has never been easier to see people on the other side of the world as our neighbors too. Fourth, imagine boldly. Resilience is about more than survival. It is about vision. Education must equip people to think critically and act ethically. Cities must be designed for inclusion, and policy must be guided by moral imagination. Excellencies, distinguished guests, there is an old saying, smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. We are certainly not living in tranquil times. And as I said at the beginning, this uncertainty is not merely a temporary storm, but we are not adrift, and we are not without modern tools. Uncertainty, if met with clarity and courage, can become a valuable compass and a crucible for renewal. It can inspire us to build societies that are not just more secure, but more just. I have often wondered how best to approach leadership in times like these. And I have come to believe good leadership is not the art of prediction. It is the practice of moral clarity in the face of ambiguity. It is the strength to hold space for difference without surrendering to division. It is simply to captain the ship, to steady the course in uncertain seas, and to ensure no one is left behind. So let us not only navigate the unknown, let us chart it. Let us map the conditions where uncertainty becomes not a threat, but a threshold. And may our work here ripple far beyond these walls, into communities, into institutions, and into the hands of generations who will steer the course next. Uncertainty is here to stay. but allow me to close with a popular saying of enduring wisdom, ambitiously attributed to Aristotle, and I am told also to Dolly Parton. You cannot change the wind, but you can adjust the sails. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highness will now take his leave.
Please give him a warm round of applause to thank him for gracing today's occasion. Thank you, sir, for that inspiring note at the beginning of day 2 of the conference.
We'd really like to thank His Royal Highness for his presence here at ICCS 2025. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, if you will. Thank you. Thank you. We invite you all to take your seats, ladies and gentlemen, as we move on with the program.
I'm really excited, actually, to build on what the Sultan has talked about. Quite many interesting points.
That's so true, Dinah. Now, His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah set the context very nicely, ladies and gentlemen, for today's key pillar as we navigate uncertainty. Now, yesterday, just to bring you back, yesterday we talked about the past. The past as we studied and understood historical trends that gave rise to multicultural societies. In today's topic, it's very important as we talk about the now and the future as we navigate uncertain times. What should we look out for, and what are some of the emerging trends that will impact our societal diversity and inclusivity that's going to be so important to talk about?
Absolutely. And what are some of the emerging fault lines that will undermine trust and confidence in institutions? Well, our panel of esteemed speakers will be diving deeper. Let me introduce them. First, Peter Ho, Senior Advisor, Centre for Strategic Future, former Head of Civil Service Singapore. Ahmed Abu Talib, former Mayor of Rotterdam City, the Netherlands. Fadi Chahadi, Founder and Managing Partner, Ethos Capital, former CEO of Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, and he will be joining us virtually. And moderating this session, may I please invite Professor Kumar Ramakrishna, Dean of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University.
Ladies and gentlemen, as our panelists get themselves organized, as you can see, as we did yesterday, the QR code is right there for you to jump onto the Q&A platform and, of course, give votes to the questions that you will want addressed as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now start with the plenary session. Professor, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. It was excellent being able to hear the opening remarks this morning by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah. He ticked many of the boxes as far as this particular plenary session is concerned. So this panel will amplify many of the points which were made by him this morning. But let me just go back a bit to yesterday to add a bit more perspective. As we heard yesterday, the issue of maintaining social cohesion in diverse multicultural societies remains an important challenge that governments and civil societies worldwide must face. Yesterday, we talked about how to think about what social cohesion in multicultural societies looks like. And in fact, yesterday, our president Taman, he talked about how social cohesion in many surveys appears to be weakening around the world. So this is a very telling challenge. So today, this morning, we go a step further by asking another key question. What are the major challenges to social cohesion in multicultural societies, both now and in the future going forward? Are these challenges ideological? Are they identity-based? Are they socioeconomic? Are they technologically driven? These are core uncertainties and challenges that certainly need navigating, and hence the topic of our session this morning, navigating uncertainty. To help us in the process of navigating such uncertainty, we are very pleased, as mentioned, to have with us three distinguished speakers with very relevant, diverse backgrounds. Of course, because of time, we don't want to go into great detail on their backgrounds. You already have heard the introductions. In any case, more details are found in your ICCS materials. But let me just broadly summarize the sense of the experience each particular person brings to the panel this morning. Mr. Peter Ho, as mentioned, has been is no stranger in Singapore policy circles. He spent more than 34 years in Singapore government, holding many senior government positions. Currently, he's a board member of RSIS, as well as senior advisor to the Center for Strategic Futures and a senior fellow of the Civil Service College. So, Mr. Peter Ho is well placed to talk about how governments could help us navigate uncertainty, the view, if you like, from a government perspective. Also, after him, we would have very pleased to have Mr. Ahmed Abu Taleb, as mentioned, former mayor of Rotterdam, served between 2004 and 2007. And Mr. Abu Taleb actually earned a very well-deserved reputation as someone who deeply understood the complexities of Dutch society and was able to bring together and promote dialogue between different communities. So what I suppose we can expect from Mr. Abu Taleb is what can the community do? What can the community do to help us navigate uncertainty? Last but not least, we have Mr. Fadi Shahade online, who, as mentioned, is founder of Ethos Capital in the US, and he is an internet entrepreneur who has had a long career founding, growing, and selling many information services companies. So from his perspective, it would be interesting to know what can the private sector do in helping us navigate uncertainty. So as you can guess from my very, very brief survey of the backgrounds of our speakers, each brings a very unique and perspective, extensive perspective, but unique perspectives to this panel. So we certainly look forward to their remarks. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 15 minutes to speak so that later we can have some discussion, after which I will moderate the session. As mentioned, please use Pigeonhole for your questions. With that preamble, may I invite Mr. Peter Ho to speak, give his remarks first. Thank you very much. Peter.
Thank you, Kumar. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, a disclaimer. I cannot speak for the government because I have been retired for more than 15 years. So all the opinions here are my own views and based on perhaps the perceptions of a somewhat detached observer who has had some experience in government in the distant past. I'd first like to thank His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah for setting the stage, and in particular in highlighting the role of technology, which is, I believe, a major driver of social change in the world today. And it's not just the impact on modern societies, but also, obviously, on multicultural societies. Indeed, Sultan Nazrin Shah referred to the digital transformation of societies. Today, people increasingly depend on the social media to communicate with other people. They even depend on the social media to understand the world that they live in, instead of reading newspapers or watching the news on television. But the social media is a recent phenomenon. It really only exploded on the scene about 20 years ago with the advent of platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Today, about 5 billion people are thought to be using the social media, or as much as 60% of the world's population, access that has been fueled by the availability of smartphones, which are getting smarter at the rate of Moore's law. Ironically, an exploding social media world increases connectivity on the one hand, but also splits societies on the other. Some consequences are already evident. The social media has dramatically weakened the ability of governments to control or regulate information flows. Misinformation and disinformation are outpacing the ability of the state to correct them and to control their impact. To illustrate this problem, we can look at an incident of the mass stabbings of young girls at a dance studio in Southport, UK in July last year, which Sultan Nazrin Shah referred to in his remarks. Now let's look at some of the details that emerged from this tragic incident. Far-right Telegram channels and influencers falsely claimed that the suspect was a Muslim migrant. These speculative posts generated over 27 million social media impressions within 24 hours. And despite the police clarifying that the attacker was born in the UK and was a Christian, they were drowned out by the online hate speech. And this led to attacks on targets associated with Islam, including a local mosque in Southport. This misinformation or disinformation then migrated from niche Telegram channels to TikTok, a mass social media platform. And this led to spontaneous riots in 27 towns in the UK, including firebombing attempts on migrant hotels. A neo-Nazi in Finland even shared online instructions with UK rioters on how to commit arson, how to avoid the police, and encouraged the targeting of Jews and Muslims. This was a case of transnational interference. The UK's Online Safety Act was criticized for its perceived inability to deal with the rapid dissemination of such information. It was seen to have failed to compel platforms like Telegram and X to remove incendiary content swiftly. Indeed, posts inciting violence remained online for days. This incident highlights jurisdictional limitations in regulating social media platforms that have a global reach. Arguably, the escalation of online communication, governments are no longer the sole or even primary gatekeepers of information, or misinformation, or disinformation, as the case may be. And this has contributed to declining trust in public institutions and traditional media, resulting in a turn to alternatives. Since 2017, the Edelman Trust Barometer has been reporting trust in crisis around the world, in governments, the media, business, and the NGOs. Indeed, exposure to alternative information sources have increased people's skepticism of mainstream interpretation of events and facts, The turmoil that followed South Korea's short-lived martial law in 2024 revealed a disturbing construction of alternative realities by far-right supporters and amplified by conspiracy theorists through the social media. YouTube, Telegram, and X were flooded with content claiming that the military was executing traitors and that North Korean agents were disguised as protesters. Unlike the mainstream view of the events as a constitutional crisis, the far right and their supporters saw it as a deep state coup attempt and that martial law was justified. The result was, in South Korea, fragmentation, exacerbating the turmoil and the sense of distrust. As this year's Edelman Trust Barometer said, we are seeing a profound shift to acceptance of aggressive action with political polarization and deepening fears, giving rise to a widespread sense of grievance. Technological developments are also reshaping how imagined communities are formed, which are less tied to geography or ethnicity and more shaped by shared digital experiences, platforms, and data interactions. These inevitably raise questions over whether the concept of the nation-state and communities built on common culture and history are being weakened. Today, the global K-pop community of fans, such as BTS Army, spans continents, races, and languages. The fans feel a deep collective identity reinforced through coordinated hashtag campaigns, live stream events, and fan translations. In 2020, K-pop fans and TikTok users coordinated to flood Trump rally registrations in Tulsa with fake RSVPs, creating an illusion of massive interest. In the realm of gaming, immersive digital spaces enabled by technology allow people to live out identities and affiliations that do not exist offline. Entire social ecosystems have formed in completely virtual worlds, such as Roblox, Fortnite, and Decentraland, often around shared missions and events. But while these communities are largely formed as a result of online interactions, they have an impact on the offline or the real world. Fortnite dances like flossing and slang like cracked, which for the uninformed means really skilled, have spread into mainstream pop culture and even to everyday speech. Some young people now appear to relate more to their online communities than to their physical social circles. For them, their online communities play a bigger role in shaping their identities, attitudes, and behaviors than their offline communities. It is not difficult to imagine how such technologies can stress multicultural societies more than homogeneous ones. Indeed, the few examples I've chosen show how difficult it is for the state to control technology because it is evolving faster than governments can make policies. Sultan Nazrin Shah referred to the digital destruction age. Digital platforms and the social media now provide ways for people to deliberately, sometimes unconsciously, circumvent government controls. But the train has already left the station. The challenge for governments is to learn what they can control, what they must control, and what they cannot. They will have to accept that the regulation of technology that is changing fast and impacting society in tandem may depend as much on the private and people sectors to better manage, or at least to manage together. It will otherwise be a fool's errand to think governments can do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ho. I'd like to invite Mr. Abdel Talib to give his remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much. It remains a complicated name, Ahmed Abu Talib, in Dutch to be a Dutch citizen and a mayor, although the name don't sound really Dutch. People from the Middle East know that Abu Talib has another meaning than, for instance, Mr. Johnson. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Last year, I had the honor in October to be present here in Singapore to speak on the conference of ECOS, elaborating on the issues of uplifting communities. And yesterday, I was witnessing a lot of theoretical contributions during this conference about social cohesion, the concept, what it is. And today, I would like to share with you in my contribution how I, during a period of almost 16 years, worked in the neighborhoods of the city of Rotterdam about the issues of social cohesion and how I did it in practice. Why? I learned when I was civil servant in the 90s, working as a spokesperson to a minister, how the devastating war in Yugoslavia, based on issues of ethnicity and religious background, led to one of the most bloody wars in Europe, a place where after the Second World War we said, never a war again. Thousands of children, women have been separated from the man and have been killed. That war led to creating 4 new countries in Europe. So I traveled upon request of the government of the Netherlands to Bosnia to help to recruit refugees to come to the Netherlands. Can you imagine that a delegation is going to a war zone, bringing refugees, and nowadays we say no refugees at all? There is a major change in the perception in Europe since that war. So I learned how important it is when I become myself in office, I have been also in the national government, how important it is to bring people together to avoid this type of conflicts. So what I did, I wrote a document myself named the We Community. And that is another approach in the country that is based on liberal principles, I. So I would like to move towards we instead of I, because in my perception, I is nothing. If you are alone on this world, just alone, you will die within 2 weeks if there is no social environment behind you. And in my city of Rotterdam, a port city, a major port in Europe, one of the larger ports in the world, we have people from all over the world, 185 nationalities. 185. So I consider myself not only the mayor of Rotterdam, but also a Secretary General of the United States of Rotterdam. You leave the city hall, you have the world. You smell the kitchens of all the world. You hear the languages from all the world. And I contributed myself by speaking 4 languages. And as the idea of diversity is a big force to the city, I wanted to invest in a program that we designed especially to work in 6 neighborhoods with the highest numbers of diversity. And I decided myself to leave the city hall, and if you look on Google, City Hall of the City of Rotterdam, it is a palace. So I decided to leave the city hall and get in an office in one of the most deprived areas of the city, Highness. It's a famous name nowadays. A small office working with the city officials and the citizens. So what we did, we had no consultants, no expensive reports. We did things instinctively. Every Friday, I walked on the streets of the neighborhood, knocked on the doors, and talked to people, and people behind me took notes. We organized dinners, the cheapest policy instrument at dinner, and a cup of coffee. So we bring people like this gathering together. People living in the same street on number 13, and the others live in number 15, have no idea who the neighbors are. But bringing a meal, people eat together and have idea to talk with each other. And the most common issues were safety, security, housing, livable environments, how clean are the streets, things like that. We so organized topics, and I said to the citizens, if our conclusions are 8 during a dinner, 4 are for me and the other 4 are for you. I would like you to contribute, to do the work yourself in your own neighborhood. I remember a day that people would like to green their own streets. So I decided to close the street on a Saturday to bring the plants, to bring the sand and the soil and the water, and the people did the work. Someone is preparing sandwiches, the other one is preparing coffee, the other one is preparing tea, and the street is closed. The mayors come in the morning to start the work and comes at the end of the day to see the results. Can you imagine what it means for such a street where people are now collaborating together to have the idea to speak about the kids and education and other things? But we did also big things like providing more education for kids at the primary schools. 10 hours more education a week. Again, 10 hours more education a week. Language and math more above the national curriculum every week. That is an investment of 40 million euros on the level of the city. We decided to demolish old houses to build new ones, to build larger ones for families, to create more space for green and trees and parks. The citizens may design the park. They may make a choice what type of trees and plants will be in the park. They do that collectively, the we approach. We built also a higher level of education centers, a gymnasium instead only centers to train people to have a good job. Because we think that these people, 260,000, have also the talents to get a higher level of education. If you believe in diversity, you believe also in talent of these people. I never forget a man from Iraq came to the Netherlands as a refugee, and he started as a cleaner. If you are a foreigner, if you are a refugee, if you are an immigrant, all things you learned in the country of origin are zero. You start from scratch. And then on a day, we observed the guy playing the piano and getting Chopin out of the piano. And then suddenly someone asked the guy, "What did you do in Iraq?" He said, "I finished the conservatorium." But in the Netherlands, he started as a cleaner. Nobody was interested in his talents. So we did this program over 15 years, which I was mayor, but we decided that we put the finances for this program aside for 20 years with collaboration of the Dutch government, the province, but also the city of Rotterdam. It's more than a political approach, because these citizens were not able to vote for me. I was appointed by His Majesty, so I was not a political figure at all. I was more a kind of a father of the city dealing with these complicated issues. And we asked the University of Rotterdam, the Erasmus University, a well-known university for its economy and also for the medical faculty. We asked them to, parallel to this employment, to this execution of this program, to see whether indeed our investments are rewarding. Because that's what we want to know. Are these investments rewarding? Otherwise, it remains a concept. And indeed, we see over the years, one of the most hard statistical number is the level of education of the kids. We see that the level is growing towards the goal, which is the average of the city. And that's working. We see that the number of kids with migrant background moving towards the university and higher level of education is growing indeed. The program is rewarding. The number of people living from social benefits is going down, and the number of people with jobs is growing. That's fascinating. The number of the elderly participating in social work is also growing, but it's vulnerable. We have to keep this type of work and this type of investments going, and the political involvement should be better. I think myself, these citizens that I've been working with and have been knocking on the door, they will never visit me at the palace, which is the city hall. I have to go to them to talk with them at their own level. The city hall is too far away. It's a palace. It's nothing for them. The blue-collar jobs they do never give them access to the city hall. That is for lobbyists, for big employers, for Shell and for all the others. They knock on my door every day. But these citizens were not there. And I think it's really important to reverse our concept of working with citizens when we really would like to realize change. And to me, it's really important also to make the right choices. The budgets are always limited. So if I have an immigrant with Turkish roots who is 60, for instance, with low education and is living on social benefits, and I have 100 euros to spend, do I spend that to support this guy to do more groceries, or to spend the 100 euro for his daughter, for better education, to prevent another wave of people getting into social benefits? Complicated choices, but we have to do that. And I think instead of talking only about the concepts of cohesion, it's really important to move towards doing it. And if you do that, how do you do that? It's easy to talk about exclusion on social media and all the other things, and I know how it works. I mean, the day that I refused, upon request of the Prime Minister, to raise the flag of Israel above the city hall, the whole far-right parties gave me a punch. I know how it works. I was victim myself of this type of social media. Fortunately, my social and political ground is solid. They couldn't shake me from my position. I'm still there, and the trust between the city and mine is still as high as it was. So the attacks from the right, the moment you say or you do things they don't like, they will punish you. We know that. So it also requires political courage to stand and to say the right things, and also to elaborate with citizens. I mean, the relation between me and the citizens over 15 years made that the far-right parties never can do any harm to me, even if they mobilize the highest powers they have in politics. So take stand, work on it, bring people together, and the magic is a hot meal and a cup of coffee, not a consultant.
Much. Thank you very much, Mr. Abu Taleb, for that very rich and practical analysis and sharing of all the excellent ground-level initiatives at the community level to promote social cohesion. It's very practical. Thank you. Right now, I'd like to invite Mr. Fadi, who's online, to share his views from the private sector perspective. Please.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. And wonderful to be following Dr. Ho and Mr. Abu Talib with their very passionate sharing of their experiences, which I very much learned from. So thank you both. And thank you all of you for indulging me to join you today from Milano in Western Europe, where I happen to be. And I apologize for not being with you. I would have loved to be in Singapore, one of the cities I've enjoyed many, many times and love. My perspective on this very important topic comes from my digital experience, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. I have studied artificial intelligence in the 1980s. My professor was John McCarthy, who invented the word artificial intelligence. And at the time, people thought I was studying a subject because I lacked natural intelligence, which I still do. But AI was not known at the time. And I spent many years since then in the digital space building digital companies. But personally, not professionally, I come from a background of many cultures. And therefore, multiculturalism in the digital space was something quite important and featured in a lot of the work I did. My father was from Egypt. My mother was from a mixed race, but I grew up in Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria is, of course, the first cosmopolitan city in the last 2,000 years where many people from different parts of the world lived together. I grew up in East Asia and Lebanon, but also in Europe and in the United States. And I hold multiple citizenships, like Mr. Abu Talib. I have many tongues. My first language was French. And therefore, multiculturalism is very much a part of who I am. And when you come to the digital world, I came to the governance of the digital world when I was asked to and selected to run ICANN in 2012. And I just need to explain to you the importance of this moment. The digital world, if you ask yourself, who governs the digital world? And that's a very important question because it's actually not clear to most people how the digital world is built and who runs what parts of it and who decides how it either contributes or, as we heard from His Highness, it could sometimes also steal from our multicultural societies. But the digital world has three layers. The physical layer, which is the networks, that is well managed by many of the governance institutions around the world. The logical layer of the internet, which is the least understood part of the digital space, that's where, frankly, the digital space comes together. So even though the internet today is made up of roughly 78, 79,000 networks, it still is called the one internet because of this logical layer. And that logical layer is critical to create a single digital space for the planet. ICANN, the institution I was running for a number of years, is the governance arm for that logical part of the internet, and therefore very critical. It manages the root zone of the entire global internet. And then on top of that, the third layer is really where we all live, the applications of the internet, the social media, email, the web, all of these are applications on top of the internet. And that is today, the governance of that layer is entirely segmented. It's all over the place. I was brought into ICANN because this institution that governs the middle of the internet, the middle of the digital space, was largely, frankly, controlled by people from the United States, from people from a common culture. And I was asked to bring my multilingual background, my understanding of different cultures, to globalize this institution. And between 2012 and 2013, joined by many people, in fact, from Singapore as well, like Asha Himrajani, who invited me to be with you today, we globalized ICANN. It had only representation from 30-odd governments. When we left, it had representation from over 150 governments. When I joined, it was headquartered to run the global logical infrastructure of the whole digital world in the US and Sydney and London and a few Western, very centric Western cities. We moved it to be active in 35 countries in the world, and I globalized the staff from 90 plus people to 500 people from all the cultures of the world. So this was a very important activity. We also introduced for the first time top-level domains on the internet that were written in a script other than the Latin ASCII script. So people could type an entire domain name in Arabic or in Cyrillic or in Chinese, which wasn't possible before. Those are the activities we did to make the digital space more open and to embrace all languages and cultures. Now, Professor Kumar asked me to think a little bit about the future. Where do we go from here? Because the realities of today's digital space and how it will remain or frankly regress into secret walled gardens is very dangerous. It's a very critical moment. AI is making that moment very, very important. So let me just touch on this. First of all, the digital space is all space. The old idea that there is cyberspace and the real world. Frankly, as Dr. Ho was saying, there's no separation anymore. Everything is digital. Every aspect of our society, of our economy is now digital. It's been digitized. And in fact, as an AI student of AI and a practitioner of AI and a user of AI, I can tell you that within the next 5 years, we may have 10 billion humans, but we will have at least 100 billion AI agents amongst us, talking to each other, talking to us. The world will become hybrid. The idea that there will be a human world and a digital world will even go away. There will be a hybrid world. And the rules for how a hybrid world will be run, who will control these agents that will be part of decision-making. Your insurance agent will talk to the agent of your insurance company, and they will negotiate things, and they may make decisions. This is the new field called agentic AI, where the agents are actually acting on your behalf. And how will you have agency over your agents or the agents of others? Those are very real issues. That's the world we're getting into that is coming. And I don't think any of us or any government or any one institution has the power to slow down the hybrid world we're about to get into. As a practitioner of digital governance, I will tell you that there are 3 things I'm concerned with. The first is how are we going to govern this hybrid world and who will govern it? The second is how will the content in this hybrid world be understood, tracked, and managed? And the third, which is maybe the most relevant for our conference, is how will the cultural norms be set in that hybrid world? Because cultural norms can be either erased, which I'm concerned with because of the high centralization in the digital space, or they can be amplified depending on how we approach that new hybrid world. So let me touch on governance quickly. Governance, many of us don't fully appreciate, as I said much earlier when I described my role on ICANN, how the digital world is governed. It is therefore important that governments, private sector, civil society understand how the internet has been governed to date. How did we make sure that the logical infrastructure is global and embraces all cultures and languages? And how do we continue doing this in the AI space? There are no institutions at the moment in that top layer that I mentioned to you before. There are no governance mechanisms that exist. There's massive fragmentation. And when there is massive fragmentation, the most powerful rule. And therefore, some platforms today have enormous power on the governance of the rules. We saw what happened when an individual acquired a major social platform. I will leave the names out of all of this, but when an individual with enormous power acquires a social platform that billions of people use, that person has enormous power, unfettered, uncontrolled, and very difficult to control because, as Dr. Ho said, this is a very transnational space. It is not a national or even international space. When I was advising Secretary General Guterres on these matters, it became clear that not even the United Nations, which is essentially the nations of the world coming together, has itself the power, nor do the nations under it have all the power they need to control a private sector player. So governance is a major issue, and we lack today the institutions at the transnational level to replicate what we did in layer 1 and layer 2 to this top layer. Content. There are 3 things I'll mention quickly on content. Who is training our AI models? Mostly people from one cultural background. It is therefore imperative we, as a multicultural society, understand and contribute to the training of AI models. Otherwise, these AI models and all the agents they produce, the billions of agents they'll produce, will not have the multicultural DNA in them. The second is hyper-personalization of digital content. There is now a massive movement because of the advent of AI on the internet to hyper-personalize what each of you sees when you touch the digital world. That was not possible before. Before, we targeted cohorts or groups of people. Now, the digital content can be hyper-personalized for you. So for those of us who are worried that the digital world made us into small groupings that are isolated, it will now attempt to isolate each of us individually by targeting content for you based on who you are and the persona that the digital world has of you. And finally, I'll touch on cultural norms. This is the third of my 3 areas of focus. Cultural norms, when I was the head of ICANN and a government or an institution approached me and said, you are in a position of authority, why don't you stop pornography or child pornography? Well, we did. We worked very hard on things like child pornography. Why? Because all of us in this room, and probably all 7 billion people, would agree that child pornography is a bad thing. And so because there's common agreement, we were able to target child pornography on the internet and stop a lot of it before it became prevalent or reach a lot of our children. But that's not the case for other things like privacy, consumerism, hate speech, free speech. Where does free speech begin and end depend on your culture, on your society, on your laws. And therefore, I was never able to participate in creating any cultural norms at that level. So I will finish this cultural issue by giving you the solution that I believe will work, which is the concept of cultural subsidiarity. Cultural subsidiarity is the legal term to say that you move the decision-making to the smallest point of competent authority, as opposed to the highest level of competent authority. And the cultural norms that will retain multiculturalism depend on each community. And we need to keep the rules for how the digital world deals with culture at the most subsidiary level. For that to happen, the platforms that control the digital world, such as Meta and Amazon and Google, need to agree to the concept of cultural subsidiarity. They need to let communities decide what is acceptable in each of their areas. I will close my 15 minutes because I think Professor Kumar was very specific correctly about that, so we allow time for Q&A. By just giving you an image that was very important to me as someone whose ancestry comes from Egypt. If you've been to a desert, you know that the deserts are usually dotted by one of 2 structures, either fortresses that protect some group or community, or oases, which are natural open spaces. So I want to ask you, is the multicultural world safer if we all create fortresses or if we create oases? Will we grow to have protective spaces that protect our culture? Or will we grow to have open, welcoming oases without walls that have rules, though? Oasis survived because there were rules. When you came to an oasis, you did not use all the water. You shared. You understood how to work with others. I hope that the digital world will contribute to the blossoming of many digital oases, and I look forward to questions and discussions with all of you. Back to you, Professor Kumar.
Thank you very much. Fadi, I would like to thank all our speakers for sticking to time. We've had, well, quite a number of questions, but I think it's possible to cluster them. I mean, a significant number of the questions essentially deal with the issue of how do we actually regulate the digital space in terms of preventing disinformation, misinformation. Is it possible to be able to regulate social media space in a way that controls the levels of disinformation in society, but without infringing freedom of speech? So I think this is something which I think Mr. Fadi might be interested to address, and perhaps also other speakers here. Mr. Ho has had perhaps something to say from in line with his comments on what governments can do, what are the limits of what governments can do, and perhaps Mr. Abu Talib as well from his perspective. Perhaps we want to try to sort of address this group of questions first. Who would like to go first?
Shall I go?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that that will be possible ever to control internet and everything on internet. So I should say, don't try it. But I agree with our speaker from Milano that if regulations are needed, do that on the lowest level. And that's the way you can take into consideration the local culture. So that's really important. In the Netherlands, we say freedom of speech is not absolute. There are limits to freedom of speech, but what are the limits? Nobody can tell you what are the limits. We say freedom of speech is there accordingly to your own responsibility for the law. So freedom of speech according to your own responsibility for the law. You may say everything on the internet and other publications, but if somebody is feeling offended, his religion has been offended, his person has been offended, he may go to court, and it's to the judge to judge. We say in the Constitution all the freedoms are equal. Freedom of religion, freedom of political party, freedom of having a union, all the freedoms to organize your own educational system, all the freedoms are equal, and only the judge may have a preference whether in a certain circumstances the thing you have been saying is considered to be offending someone. So we put a judge in the highest position to take a position if needed. And we can work with this. I was responsible for the right for demonstration. In the Netherlands, the mayor is the highest authority for the police. I was a police chief, and I was also responsible for organizing demonstrations, whether pro or cons. And the law says the mayor shall not be having an opinion about the subject of demonstration. So whether it's a right group or left group or whatever, I would never have an opinion about the demonstration based on the content of the demonstration. That should be, my role is giving the city the space, the streets for the people to demonstrate, whether 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, except if they cause damage to the city, or if they cause the damage to the public good, or they are causing threat for the public health. 3 reasons in the law given to the mayor to prohibit, but never say, well, you are pro this and you are contra this. I am from this political color, I allow this and I deny the other. So all the freedoms are equally, and it's up to the mayor to take a position, and up to the judge to take a position, and the mayor is neutral. in organizing all types of gatherings, allowing public speech for everyone equally.
Thank you. Mr. Ho?
I think we have to think about regulation of technology as part of a larger social construct. And that social construct has to be a consensus that society as a whole has to reach between the people, the private sector, which is obviously got its own interest in developing and advancing technology, plus the government, which of course has to look at a lot of and juggle a lot of complex outcomes. And that social construct begins with asking questions like, what do we want from technology? Is technology there just for the economy? Is technology there to build a cohesive society? Is technology there to advance communications? These are basic questions which do have to be asked, and these can only be settled through a kind of social discourse. If you don't ask these questions, then the default is to say, well, this is bad or this is good, and we'll regulate this and we'll let other things pass. So I'm of the view that when we deal with emerging technologies, we do have to start off with a conversation as to what we expect from the conversations, and there are no simple answers. The worst, I think, is for governments or politicians to claim that they have the answers to very complex problems such as technology. Anybody who claims that, I think we should question whether he understands what the issues are. So I think we do have to start off with a conversation, and it will take more than a short panel discussion to find out what the answers are. But it does require society as a whole to come together to talk about these issues. The problem, of course, with technology is it's changing extremely fast. So you need to be very nimble and you need to be very quick on your feet to establish these conversations. By the time you organize things, you take your time, things already have changed, and by then it's already too late. And I suspect with things like AI, artificial intelligence, perhaps it's a bit late already. And we just have to learn to find ways to live with it, rather than to believe that we can truly organize things so that it doesn't outpace our ability to get what we want out of it.
Nowadays, technology is becoming a geopolitical issue in Europe. All the government institutions are storing the data on databases in the US, the clouds. And we have learned in last months that it is possible for the US government to intervene in the clouds. That's the way the International Court in The Hague has been cut from its email and all the other data storage on the clouds in the US. It's not possible now for the International Court in The Hague to work due to all the data is stored on the cloud in the US, which they cannot reach. The US has been blocking that. That is an alarming signal for the world, but it's also an alarming signal for Europe. And Europe is now saying we have to build our own cloud system in Europe. And we're going to do it. There will be a major effort for 10, 15, 20 years, but we're going to do it. The other one is the way we use credit cards. All these credit cards are connected one way or another to payment systems in the US. That's critical. The European Bank in Germany is now thinking about establishing paying systems in Europe to become less independent or not independent from systems in the US. We have been for years in Europe trusting on our trade partner in the US as a free world, the little free world where data access was always available and so on. But we see that things are changing. Data storage and dealing with technology is becoming a geopolitical issue. And so the free world, the bloc of the EU, the European Union, is moving towards becoming independent from the cloud in the US.
Mr. Fadi, I want to bring you in here.
Dr. Ho's wise comment that let's not fool ourselves about what we can do and what we can't do is important. It's the fact. The digital space is not just fast, as he said, but I remind you, is very transnational. So yes, we may be able to move things to Europe or databases to Europe. We don't even know what data is. We're building on past knowledge. The technology is moving so fast that data, synthetic data, will be more important than even natural data. There will be more data created by AI than the data all humans have created in the last 30, 40 years in the next 6 months. So the digital space, as Dr. Ho noted very wisely, is just very, very fast and complex. And therefore, we need new governance methodologies, not old governance methodologies. And he did touch in the first part of his comment on multi-stakeholderism, meaning governance that is not just by governments, but by what he called the social compact that brings governments, businesses, as well as society together to make these decisions. But that's the context. The question that was asked is very specific, so I want to make sure I give my thoughts on that, which is how do we deal with the growing amount of data that is misinformation? And by the way, I'm sorry to alarm you, but if you thought we had a lot of bad or misinformation today, imagine now how much of that will be created by AI. Multiply that by millions of times, because it used to be that a person had to sit down and create false information and push it on an environment. Now we're going to have bots, AI bots, that on their own can create within a blink of a second massive amounts of misinformation. So this is a real question and a real issue, the person that brought this to the table. And so that I don't leave you very depressed about this, I'll just mention that the solution to a lot of this lies in the very technology that enabled misinformation in the first place. We just need technologists to have the will and maybe the request to comply with laws and rules, then make them use their very technology to track the source of information. Dr. Ho in his opening mentioning the Edelman Trust Barometer, and that same barometer he brought up to all of you has very good studies on how to track the provenance of data. And technology is able to do that. So while we cannot make sure every bit of information on the internet is good or correct, there are mechanisms to create spaces where the provenance of information is tracked by the very same technology, and you as a user are able to audit where this information comes from and then make up your mind as to whether this is information that you want to track. The problem today is we don't know where information is coming from. So I hope I touched just a little bit on the issue of misinformation, and it is a big issue, and it is a global issue, a transnational issue, and will require a lot of technology. But I am hopeful that with the right incentives, the technology companies that permeate a lot of that information will be either compelled or will have the goodwill to actually put in place these mechanisms.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fadi. A set of questions here also relate to fault lines. So, of course, fault lines are a big threat to social cohesion and multiculturalism. So, a question here kind of sums it up. What, in your view, What role does ideology, both political and religious, play in the emergence of new social fault lines? And this applies, of course, online, in the online space, as well as in the community. Are the fault lines essentially political, are they religious, or are they based on something else? So in your view, in your experience, what has been the role of ideology or religious issues, extremism? Perhaps, Mr. Abu Talib?
In my experience, political ideology is one thing. We have in Europe a whole spectrum of ideologies, from the far right, believing in individual capacities, the liberalism. We have the Christian democracies somewhere in the middle. We have my type of ideology. I'm from the Labour Party, which is center-left. Then to the left, we have the Greens. So all these type of ideologies. But I can tell you one experience that I have, and that is despite ideologies, despite political schools, it matters who is running, who is taking the decisions. It really matters. If you make a choice for yourself to which political school I count myself, fine. But at the end, it depends on who is taking that decision. And if it is a believer in the multiculturalism, and that we all have own 1 square meter space on this globe, and that we deserve to collaborate together, and that we are not here on this earth to kill each other, but we are here to make a beautiful environment to live in, to invest in a beautiful future, a sustainable future, which I believe myself. This is my starting point of dealing with politics. If you believe in that, that's another approach than somebody in politics who say, Peter, you know what your problem is? Your problem is Abu Talib exists. If Abu Talib would not exist, you will have a fine environment, less to share, all is for you. And that is a type of political exploitation of primitive feelings of people. Mm-hmm. Go back to the 50s. It was nice. No planes and nobody coming from other places. We spoke the same language, we had the same food. It's now becoming ugly. And all that is because Abu Talib exists. So we tried to kick him out of the country. And then the environment will be safe. Less crime, less hate, and all the others. It makes a difference, and it's really makes sense who is dealing with political positions to take decisions. And I remember that it was member of the national government, Secretary for Social Affairs. Exactly the same day, I did nothing. I was just inaugurated. Even I was not entered the parliament, that the guy from one of the political parties to the right come up with a resolution in the parliament to withdraw the trust from me. That is the highest resolution you can do for a politician. And asked by the press, why are you doing that? He said, well, this guy was not born in the Netherlands. He can't really not be Dutch. And the other arguments to the press, he said, but this guy is a Muslim, and this is not a Muslim country. We don't like to have Muslims in the government. So this is the environment in which we have to deal with multiculturalism. And it was my duty to show to the nation that the other solution is better. That is, it's giving a better solution. It's giving us a better common ground to grow this country. Well, this politician who said we cannot have Muslims in the country, in the government, he forget that the Netherlands ever was the largest Muslim country in the world. Do you know that? A European country was the largest Muslim country in the world? The Netherlands. It was occupying Indonesia.
Oh, all right. I was wondering about that. Mr. Ho, would you like to-
I'll give a somewhat different perspective on this. In recent months, I've become quite addicted to TikTok. I find it extremely entertaining. But I also know that there's a dark side to TikTok because when you, I don't subscribe to anything, so it pushes things through some sophisticated algorithm depending on how long you look at things. So you'd not be surprised to know that I get a lot of feeds on hawker centers and good restaurants to go to. But on the other hand, it also feeds things like the MAGA-based stuff on Mr. Trump, as well as those who oppose. And I think for the unsophisticated viewer of TikTok, who doesn't necessarily look beyond TikTok and read widely, his view will be colored and conditioned by whichever feed is successful in holding his attention. And at the root of this is two things. One is the algorithm. How much we know about the algorithm and how it determines what is fed to us. And secondly, and I think this is a problem with the advent of the social media, I think fewer people read widely. And therefore, their choices are very narrow. Their understanding of the world is very narrow. And they cannot make free and informed choices because they are channeled into certain points of view which are determined by the algorithms on their social media. So I think this is one of the dark sides of technology which we don't know how to grapple with. And it's connected to issues like, do the people trust the mainstream media? If they don't trust the mainstream media, they turn to the social media, and then they get trapped into this vicious cycle of ideologies which they can't get out of. So I think this is one of the issues, and it has a lot to do with, in each individual country, what the level of trust in the media is, how much willingness there is to have open and free discussions on sensitive topics between the people and the government. And I think these are important aspects of the problem, and they need a lot more considered discussion. Today, I think we tend to dismiss this side of things, but I think it's a very important area which I would be concerned with.
Thank you. Mr. Fadi, would like to weigh in here?
Yeah, not much to add other than to just accentuate what Dr. Ho just said. He mentioned how this narrowing he described, that's what I referred to earlier as hyper-personalization, which to date has been limited, say, in TikTok on what you look at. But soon, those digital platforms will be using artificial intelligence to watch a lot more than what you do on TikTok to build a persona of Dr. Ho in their systems that then gets fed information from multiple places he visits on the internet based on this persona. That was not possible before AI. In other words, we didn't have the capacity to do this for every human on the planet. Today, artificial intelligence allows for that, and that narrowing or hyper-narrowing to a person is a concern that I mentioned earlier, that it will further even the separation of each person's digital exposure to things that the digital world decides you want to see, or they want you to see, so that maybe you can buy more things, or make different decisions, or follow certain ideologies. And then I'll just close my comment on this question by simply saying that, back to my analogy, or at least my imagery of an oasis versus a fortress, there are ideologies that are built on the idea of being a fortress, of saying Abu Talib is not one of us. We want to create a fortress and protect what we have. And there are ideologies that are open, that believe that it is in their openness that they thrive and they grow and they become attractive. And that's the same whether it's in real life or in the digital life. So when I talk to my own students or my own children, I always caution them about following ideologies that thrive on being fortresses, on closing themselves off, because these are ideologies that usually do not have the depth to be able to stand on their own, even in an open environment.
Thank you very much. There's a very good question here, actually, which gives an opportunity to draw upon the practical experience of our colleagues on the panel. I'll just read it out. Can you share a framework for building trust with government institutions through the role of community partnerships? How does it look like? Specifically, how to maximize its opportunities and mitigate challenges. So how do you build this partnership? Perhaps, Mr. Abu Talib?
Live in palaces and go into the streets. That's the only way to do that. And to talk to people and to search for common ground. That doesn't mean that you answer all the questions with yes. Sometimes no is also an answer. And to seek for differences. In one city, it could be differences. One neighborhood can be the issue housing, the other one can be public order, the other neighborhood. And what people like is that the man or the woman in power gets to the level of the streets. So I organized 134 of these meetings. Time consuming. It takes at least 3 hours a night, an evening. Starts at 6 o'clock with the dinner, and we end at 10 o'clock. The police chief was with me, the chief prosecutor was with me, the director of social housing was with me, even public lighting. Sometimes public lighting can become an issue. So we went there. We collected the information about that neighborhood. We projected the information, crime, for instance, or other issues. And then we say to our citizens, tell me, did you recognize this picture? If it is not accordingly, tell us what is wrong. And if you want to change things, don't ask me only to do things. Yes, I'm the one with the budgets and the power to do things, but you have the quality of change in your own hands. What is your role in changing your own living circumstances? I think that is in the Bible stated that the situation of people never changes unless people would like to work on their own change. So my efforts as a government is to push things forward, but not always to be the one who initializes change. Change can be coming from the people in the neighborhoods. And I mean, that's the way I did it. And trust is a mutual thing. We see nowadays in the Netherlands that not the citizens are losing sometimes trust in the government. No, we see the reverse. We see that sometimes the government is losing trust in citizens. Well, that's new. When I came to the Netherlands in '76, I was surprised that I can apply for something on a paper and then sign it under the paper, and it says, everything you signed for is truth. It was fine. I was coming from a dictatorship. And then suddenly I communicate with a system that says, you trust me, and we trust that the information you give us is based on truth. Well, the truth is now becoming a very complicated thing. What is truth? If you walk in a park that way, you have a picture, and the day after you work the reverse direction, the same park, same path, you see different things. Did you observe that? You see completely different things. Just walking, it's the same path. So we have different objectives and different views. And I think trust is complicated, but we have to work on it to create your own definitions of mutual trust. To me, there was a big surprise the day that I said I'm going to quit from the office last year, October, that the number of people applied for a meet and greet was that tremendous. There was not space in the city to shake hands. All halls were too small. So we decided to organize a festival in a big park to give people the possibility to have a handshake. To me, that was a big signal of the way of trust and being really close to people. Not only the store mayor who has the police force to dictate things if riots in the city, that you have to do that, but also the man or the woman to bring people close to you and even maybe to cry here if necessary, to be a kind of a father for your citizens. And I think really you want to work on a cohesive approach, leave the palace, go to the neighborhood.
Thank you. Mr. Ho, would like to...
I just want to draw your attention to my concluding remarks just now, and that is if I look at a state as a system, there are three components in the system. One is the government. The second part of that system is the people. And the third part of the system is the private sector. And we often tend to conflate government with the state. But actually, we should be thinking of the whole system. And it's not about government, it's about governance.
Correct.
I define government as the organization of the public sector. But governance is the organization of the public sector, the private sector, and the people. And we don't pay enough attention to that part because it is in that triangular relationship that issues of trust are resolved, built up, or destroyed. And I think it is incumbent in a fast-changing, uncertain world where there are a lot of uncertainties that the governments have the humility to know that first, they don't have all the answers. Secondly, the problems are so complex that they have to work with others to get things done or to resolve the problems to reach some kind of societal consensus. And if you do this process right, I think trust is enhanced. If you ignore the fact that you are part of a much larger system, trust is destroyed or undermined. So I think it's very incumbent in terms of today's context of great uncertainty, rapid change, that governments learn better to work together with the society, with the private sector, to build that kind of societal consensus that can move the society forward. It may not necessarily produce the most optimal results, but then you can never produce optimal results in complex, fast-changing situations.
Thank you.
That's a generic kind of response to the question.
That's fine. So, Fadi, would you like to add anything here?
I just would like to convince Dr. Ho to leave TikTok and go back and lead government a little bit because it is rare to hear such wisdom from someone who served with distinction, obviously, but really what you just said, Dr. Ho, is so wise that governments need to work with the other stakeholders in their system to create modern, nimble, agile governance systems that respond to the changing world we're in. And governments that understood that, and by the way, I'm I'm quite familiar with, during my time at ICANN, how the Singaporean government, for example, contributed and gave to the idea that Dr. Ho mentioned of multi-stakeholder governance. I'm very impressed by the work that they did at the time. But we need that kind of social compact, that together we bring better governance. This way, the private sector is not acting on its own with no checks and balances. The government sector is not imposing regulations that are not in tune with the digital world and culture that pervades us now. And frankly, society, civil society, and the people have their voice at the table. 3 ways. Even when I was advising the chairman of the World Economic Forum, I kept telling him that he kept saying it's private-public partnerships. I said, no, this is missing a leg for that stool. Private, public, and people. Civil society has to be at the table. And if they're excluded from Davos, then we're missing a very important voice. That is a very good, I think, framework. The person who sent the question said, is there a framework? That is the framework, and Dr. Ho described it better than I could. And frankly, Mr. Abu Talib implemented it with distinction in Rotterdam. So this is the example we should look for when we ask about frameworks for collaboration between governments and society.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of the session, so I'd like to give our speakers an opportunity to deliver some closing remarks, maybe each about 30 seconds. As a framing question, I mean, we could summarize it as, what is the role of NGOs, faith leaders, and civil society in promoting multiculturalism, well, recognizing their limitation in terms of resources, influence, and capacity. Perhaps Abu Talib?
Well, I should say continue connecting and learn from each other, not only on the level of the concepts, but our practical doing. It's really important how we do things. And that can be different from place to place, city to city, country to country. Fadi said it has also something to do with culture. I think that's really important. And at the end, I would like to congratulate Singapore, first for being in the lead, and secondly for bringing all these people together to talk about that important issue. Even if there is, in Europe nowadays, a disbelief in the fact that multiculturalism is a fact and we have to invest in it, Singapore is continuing to say, no, for us, this is the way. We have to do it together. Neighborhoods, cities, nations, globally. Well, thank you, Singapore, for that.
Thank you. Mr. Ho?
I don't know how to summarize this sort of thing, but I would say it's very important that we recognize we are living in a world of change, and not just change that is rapid, but I think it's got a quality of acceleration, which makes things even more challenging. Acceleration as evidenced by, say, Moore's Law. Moore's Law is an acceleration. And I think we are living in this particular kind of world which imposes enormous challenges on not just governments but societies as a whole. And it means that any kind of wishful thinking that we can bring things back to the status quo ante is what it is, wishful thinking. Instead, we just have to prepare ourselves psychologically, but in terms of our policies, towards a world that is going to be different in the future. And if we do it properly, we can seize the opportunities. If we don't recognize these changes, we'll miss the opportunities and we could end up in a worse place.
Thank you. Final short comment from Mr. Fadi.
Yes, I just want to also second Mr. Abu Talib's comment of just saying how Singapore is a true oasis of multiculturalism. And I hope you stay this way. You are a beacon in the world of multiculturalism as a society, as a country, as a city. Really, I hope this oasis continues to thrive as it has for many years and be an example of what we could all be around the world, given the divisions we're seeing. And I also want to just go back and quote either Dolly Parton, as His Highness said, or Aristotle, that the winds of change from the the hybrid world we're going to live in are unstoppable. Our job is to figure out how to adjust our sails, as he quoted, and how to really get ready for this, but also be positive about it. I think we should not leave this excellent session with a sense of gloom about the digital world, but rather that we can really adjust our sails and really fly through that wind that is coming. Or we can just keep our sails down and insist on the old ways, as Mr. Abu Talib said, and then we'll be stuck. But there is a lot of opportunity for our young people, for our young graduates, to benefit from this space and to advance our lot together. And I hope we take advantage of these with good governance and remaining open as oasis, like Singapore is.
Thank you very much. Well, we have come to the end of our plenary session. I tried very hard to bring in as many questions as I could, but I hope you beg the audience indulgence because there's so many questions and speakers have so many good ideas. We wanted to give them time to share. But please join me in thanking our panel. It was an excellent panel and appreciate very much. Sapadi, thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Professor Ramakrishna, for moderating. May I invite gentlemen on stage to take a step forward for the group photo, please, sir. Yes, and Mr. Chafadi, you will be on vision as well for the group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, 1.5 hours, I would say that we were all very engaged. Please, a big round of applause once again for our panelists for speaking from their hearts very passionately and giving us so much to think about. Now let's think about resilience and reinvention, and of course Aristotle and Dolly Parton during the break. Thank you, gentlemen. Please take your seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of announcements as we lead you into the coffee break. We'd just like to remind everyone, a gentle reminder, that there are dedicated buffet lines for our kosher and vegetarian guests. So with respect, we ask you to allow that space, the dedicated lines, to be left for them for their special dietary requirements. And we thank you for your cooperation and understanding on that.
And of course, we would love for you to take a few more steps to visit the Cohesion Cafe. I can tell you what they're serving today. Cashew cookies and 2 varieties of very sweet traditional Singaporean drink. So do drop by. We'll see you back here at 11:30 for the next part of the program. Very exciting. The Southeast Asian Social Cohesion Radar. See you later.
We will make announcements to bring you back in on time, ladies and gentlemen, for 11:30. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I do know you're enjoying your break right now. Just a housekeeping announcement, if you will, so that I remind you to have you come in good time. Our next session will be commencing very soon. We'd like to invite you to make your way into the ballroom as soon as you are done with your refreshments. As soon as you're done. Now, we'd also like to mention, as you're enjoying the company of others right there at the break, that event recordings and photographs taken during the event may be used by organizers or related entities, print media, videos, websites, and all social media platforms. Now, should you have any concerns with regards to these, please approach any one of our staff, the organizing team of ICCS. Just approach any one of them. Now, should you take any photos of your own and are posting on your social medias, please do remember to use the hashtag ICCS2025, hashtag Cohesive Societies, hashtag Resilient Futures. And do remember also to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X at ICCSSG. Do know that the conference is open to media. Again, a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that we will start very soon. We invite you to bring your coffees and your refreshment into the ballroom as we will begin in good time. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to make your seats into the ballroom. We will start with the next plenary session in just a few minutes. Again, we seek your cooperation to make your way in to the ballroom. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who did not hear the announcement earlier, we'd like for you to make your way into the ballroom now, please. We will begin soon.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the show. There's quite a number of you still out in the foyer. I know you can hear me. So I'd like to invite you back into the room as we embark to find out the results of the Southeast Asian Social Cohesion Radar. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, this is only the second time that the study has been conducted. I personally am looking forward to know at least part of the study results. It's an overview of perceptions towards social cohesion across Southeast Asia. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my guests on stage. First, Dr. Leong Chan Hung, Senior Fellow and Head of Social Cohesion Research Program at Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU. Professor Paul Hedges, Professor of Interreligious Studies, Studies in Interreligious Relations in Plural Societies Program at Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU, and Professor Farish Noor, Professor, Universitas Islam International, Indonesia. And now moderating this session, we have Mr. Warren Fernandez, Senior Fellow and Head of National Security Studies Program at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU.
Now, as we have for all plenary sessions, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like for you to engage with us. The QR codes are on your screens right now. Do scan them and, of course, vote for the questions you want answered most as well. We're going to hand over the floor to Warren Fernandez for now to enjoy this session, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, and welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session, which is to launch the 2025 Southeast Asia Social Cohesion Studies Radar Report. And as you know, this is the second time we're doing this. The first time we did it was in 2022, and this study this year is an attempt to sort of build on that work and of course to refine and develop it further. But the aim remains very much the same. It's to help us get a good handle on the state and the strength of our social relations across the region. And social cohesion, as we've been talking about for the last day and a half, someone said yesterday, it's complex, it's complicated, it's a nebulous idea, and we're really trying to get a handle on many, many things interrelated. It's a sense of our belonging, the acceptance of our diversity and inclusiveness, our confidence in each other, the trust between people and their leaders and institutions, our shared sense of community and common purpose, our solidarity and willingness to work with and live with each other and to help each other despite our differences. And so this report and the findings, as you'll see in a minute, basically invites us to ponder a few big questions. What is the state of social cohesion in our part of the world? Where is it strong and where is it not so strong? And what factors contribute to fostering it and also to enhance it? And I think the study and the findings you will find in a minute, as my colleagues elaborate on it, relate to a lot of what we've been discussing over the last day and a half. President Taman and this morning Sultan Nazrin Shah have spoken about the troubled times that we live in, the rising tensions amongst our communities, our societies and states, the drift towards polarization and populism, the rise in extremes of nationalism and sectarianism, and new fault lines that are emerging between classes, generations, across haves and have-nots, and between the governed and those who would govern. And you'll find that the study goes into a lot of detail on all of these areas. And it is in that context that we want to present this report, the 2025 Social Cohesion Report. And I have this distinguished panel to help us do that. We're going to start with Dr. Leong, who is the principal investigator of this report, and he is the best person to walk us through the findings. And then Professor Paul Hedges, who was the principal investigator of the 2022 report, will be able to draw similarities and dissimilarities between the two. And then last but not least, Farish is a well-known Southeast Asia hand, well-known to RSIS and to and many of you in this room, will be able to sort of help put the findings in a broader regional context. So without further ado, let me call upon Shah, please.
Thank you, Warren.
Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. And I'm here to share with you some of the key highlights of the radar study. And as what Warren pointed out, this is actually based on a national survey, right, of cohesion from 10 ASEAN countries. Now, I know there's a lot of material that I'm going to go through, so don't worry if you miss out any part of it. You can always approach us later after the presentation, and we'll be happy to share with you some of the key research findings. I know time is short, so let me do the contrary, which is to jump into the conclusion first, right, before I go through the details of this. Right, so what are some of the key findings, right, from the 2025 Southeast Asian Social Cohesion Radar? Number one, when we look at the results, what we see is that cohesion, or the state of cohesion, is relatively strong in Southeast Asia, with an average of 72% indicated that cohesion in their own country is relatively strong. Based on the respondents, how they evaluate the quality of ties between different races, between different religions, and between different language groups, generally there's a broad acceptance of cultural diversity within Southeast Asian countries. For example, 7 out of 10 people are confident that people from diverse communities will help each other regardless of the background. Naturally, not everything is rosy. There are always opportunities to do better. And based on the findings, what we can say is that some countries can do more, right, to promote and strengthen institutional trust and perceived policy fairness. And I think that point was kind of reiterated by the keynotes, right? Where are some of the areas that perhaps we as a community can come together and do more? To begin with, why Southeast Asian Social Cohesion Radar? Why this part of the world? For the benefit of those who are not familiar with Singapore or the region, allow me to give you a very quick overview. Southeast Asia is one of the most diverse as well as dynamic regions in the world. It is home to 700 million people, speak over 200 languages, and all the major faiths and races are all represented here in this part of the world. Now, in spite of this unique cultural landscape, there is no systematic attempt to track the state of cohesion. More importantly, social cohesion is key ingredient for harmony, stability, sense of nationhood, and economic progress. Not just for one particular country, but for the region as a whole. So what is cohesion? What is social cohesion? Broadly speaking, cohesion refers to the quality of social ties in societies, how we view the engagement, how we view the relationship with one another and between groups. Social cohesion is both multi-level and multi-dimensional. It is multi-level because it involves many different communities, be that from different races, different religions, different public or private institutions. It is multi-dimensional because it involves many different types of outcomes, such as trust, cultural identity, or network of friends. Research on social cohesion in other parts of the world uses the Bertelsmann-Stefan framework. This is one of the most commonly cited approach when we look at social cohesion research. In Southeast Asia, because of our diverse cultures and the unique shared history, we want to measure cohesion with an established framework, but also at the same time ensure that the approach considers some of the unique contexts of this part of the world. To this end, in 2022, we did a pilot study measuring social cohesion with a small sample of 100 thought leaders in each country. The goal is to test bed an instrument that can work here and to customize the questions that will incorporate this region's demography and characteristics. In 2025, this year, we have validated this instrument with an in-depth national samples, interviewing at least 1,000 people in each country, and in total we have more than 10,000. More importantly, we are not just looking at the result survey, we are also looking at how the findings may be triangulated with different inputs from country experts or from some of the discussions that we can see in the online space. So what is the Bertelsmann-Stefan framework, and how do we measure the social cohesion? Cohesion is about social relations between people from diverse races, religions, and language groups, or what we call the horizontal ties. Now here, in terms of social relations or horizontal ties, that can also be decomposed further into more refined dimensions, more refined measures of what it means when you talk about horizontal ties, engagement with different groups. And here we have measures relating to social network, trust in people, and acceptance of diversity. And these are some of the sample questions of that. Now, second, cohesion can also be about connectedness between people and public institutions, or what we call the vertical ties. Now again, this domain can be further decomposed into more refined measurements of what vertical ties means, looking at measurements relating to identification, national or cultural identification, looking at institutional trust, and looking at policy fairness. Lastly, social cohesion can also be about the focus on common good, or the sense of civic mindedness, if you may. Right? And similarly, this is also one where we can decompose that further into different, more refined measurements of civic mindedness, such as solidarity, respect for social rules, and civic participation. Now, all in all, there are 60 questions in total, and the sample questions are on the right. So the participants will basically rate every single question on a scale of 1 to 5. 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. And broadly speaking, when they indicate that they agree, it means that there is a level of connection and cohesion. Now, we have collected data, right? Due to time constraint, I'm not going to cover the in-depth, so I'm going to show you a very simplified version of the analysis. And here on the figure, you can see at the bottom that we have 10 ASEAN countries, and for each country, we have 4 colored bars. the blue, the orange, the green, and the red. The blue bar represents the overall social cohesion index, the orange bar represents the social relation domain, and the green bar represents the connectedness domain, and lastly, the red bar, the focus on common good. We sum up all the scores, right, from all the items that fall under each domain and dimensions, and collectively that reflects the average percentage of people who rated strong or very strong agreement with the statements. I know, okay, this is the part where we are all very tempted and excited and want to jump in the conclusion by looking at, which country may score higher or lower, right? What I want to say here is that it is natural that the social cohesion scores for the 10 countries will be different because all 10 countries are at different levels of economic development, right? So this is perfectly normal. And what is more important is to look not at how the different countries would score, right, on the cohesion measure, but more importantly, on the relative scores of the domains within each country, because that kind of gives us an idea where are the strengths, where are the areas or opportunities for development. So what do we gather, right? So overall, if you look at the blue bar, all the countries score above the midpoint with a regional average of 72%. In terms of social relations, the horizontal ties, there's broadly an acceptance of diversity and inclusion among different communities, be that different races, different religious groups, different language groups, and that represents a solid baseline of trust between diverse communities. In terms of connectedness or vertical ties, the quality of trust between people, public institutions, and the states, if you look at the bars, some of the countries tend to be lower, right? And those are some of the areas where, relatively speaking, vertical ties as compared to horizontal ties tend to be somewhat lower for most countries. Now, lastly, you can also look at the measures in the context of common good, right? So that sense of civic mindedness within society. And again, some countries will score higher and others can do more to promote that. Another way to conceptualize that will be looking at the typologies of cohesion, right? So here we have four different, if you like, typologies of countries, right? The first one is one where there's a fairly robust ties, right? Whether it's horizontal and vertical, right? And countries represent that will be countries like Brunei, Vietnam. The second row represents countries where there's strong mutual respect between diverse communities or the horizontal ties. And here we have Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia as examples. Last but not least, we have a typology looking at the confidence between communities and institutions and the state. Right? So this is the vertical ties, right, between communities and public institutions. And examples of that will be Laos and Cambodia. And finally, a sense of civic mindedness and participation. Right? And countries that rated higher on that will be Philippines, Thailand, and Myanmar. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is actually my favorite part of the presentation. Now, in analyzing any research instrument, it's always important to check that you measure what you intend to measure. And when we correlate the radar finding with other global indicators, macro indicators, we see a trend, right, and some interesting observations. First, cohesion is correlated with economic development and indicators of stability, right? And this is similar to other global studies on social cohesion, right? Second, if you look carefully at the ordering of the different countries, you realize that something interesting, right? Cohesion here is not related to any political system, whether it's a constitutional monarchy, a democracy, or a communist state. And this is important because it suggests that civil liberties alone does not correlate with cohesion. It's something more than that, right? Not in Southeast Asia. Third, while economic resources like GDP, for instance, can be mobilized to support cohesion, there are other variables that are also important here, right, that you need to consider in when we talk about cohesion, fostering cohesion in societies. So what are the key takeaways? Let me very quickly take you through. Number one, fostering cohesion is a work in progress. It requires continual, proactive engagement between communities, even if we have established strong baseline of acceptance between diverse groups. Second, there are opportunities for public institutions to harness the strength of community ties to foster trust. And local institutions, be that civic or religious bodies, are most familiar with the challenges, the domestic challenges. Policymakers can therefore engage the diverse groups that can help, and that will also signal to everyone that their voices count in making fair policies. Last point, it is also important to seek consensus on priority areas of development, and our preliminary findings suggest that income inequality and rural development are key considerations. This is the last slide, right? And I'd like to bring everyone back to the starting point of this research. Why are we doing this? Why is the social fabric of Southeast Asia matter to everyone in this part of the world? In recent months, we have seen how political and the social climate evolve globally. Stability and peace is a precious commodity. And importantly, sectarian tensions, be that related to race, religion, or political values, do not stop at the geographical border. What is good for one country will benefit another, and what is challenging will also be experienced by your neighbors. And for this reason, right, we want to partner you in the next stage of our radar development to analyze what are some of the culture-specific challenges, to identify drivers of our cohesive norms and the policy levers that can make a difference, and importantly, to understand what are some of the subgroups that will benefit most from multicultural dialogue like ICCS today. So please reach out to us if you'd like to find out more about the radar study, and we look forward to hearing from you. The QR code is on the right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chan Hong. Thank you for that very quick overview of the findings. There's a lot of data, but don't worry, you can get all of it on that QR code to go through at your leisure. Believe me, there's a lot of depth to it. And important point that Chan Hong makes, the report is not intended as a report card or a ranking across countries, or we don't intend to be making invidious comparisons across them. It's really a snapshot of where we are at a point in time, which we can then track over time and to draw lessons which are from all our shared experiences. We'll go into the discussion, but I'd like to draw on Paul next for his thoughts, top-line thoughts on the findings and also how it might compare with 2022.
Thank you very much, Warren. I think I'll talk about three main things. Partly is the comparison with the 2022 survey. I'll also say a little bit about what it is that we think they were actually measuring when we're doing this. And finally, talk a little bit about religion, because that's my particular sort of academic expertise. So firstly, as I think Warren's mentioned, these are snapshots in time. 2022, of course, we're just coming out of COVID. 2025, there are geopolitical issues affecting us all. Asia Pacific has its own particular sort of instabilities and issues. So we're not saying, like, as you've mentioned, this is the state of these countries. There are things that are sort of moving them both up and down at different times. And of course, coming out of this, some of the countries that have done particularly well on this survey did not do so well in 2022, or it looks that way. And again, sort of the country that came out top in 2022 is not on the top this time. So these snapshots in time is affecting this. And also, of course, who we're talking to. As Chan Hu mentioned, the last time we went to the thought leaders, so policymakers, academics, people in business and civil society, across various things. And this time it has been an analysis of more grassroots people. And of course, each group is seeing very different things. The grassroots much more connected, but often very locally, whereas sort of, if you like, the thought leaders, sometimes bigger pictures, but not always so connected to some of the issues. So we're making no claims again that this is the truth. These are snapshots in time and snapshots of particular demographics. Of course, we try to make the demographics as representative as we can, but it's never going to be perfect. This is not the reality. It is the best attempt we can get to represent that reality. And also, of course, these are changing all the time. So I've mentioned these two sort of snapshots. Again, maybe 2028. Perhaps we'll be looking at the next one. So many different things can change between now and then. There's no attempt, if you like, to be definitive in what we're saying. Now, perhaps coming on to sort of what it is that we think we're measuring. Of course, the Bertelsmann stiff tongue thing, we have these 3 domains and 9 dimensions within this. And to some extent, we give them all an equal ranking, but that's not necessarily the case. Perhaps there are certain things, and I think the Sultan, when he was speaking, mentioned that certain aspects of trust between people are perhaps more important than the sort of the vertical ties between sort of government. And of course, from country to country, dependent upon time, this can vary a lot. Of course, with COVID, we saw, trust in sort of institutions incredibly important, but also these horizontal ties are. So it will vary from country to country as to sort of which one of these perhaps sort of more significant. So again, when we do these measurements, we need also to dig down, well, what actually matters in that country, in these communities, as significant there. I'm also somewhat worried about surveys like this, and perhaps to mention, I forget to date, but the first time the Bertelsmann Stiftung did their survey in Asia, they discovered that Hong Kong was the most cohesive society according to their measures. This was shortly before basically everything imploded in Hong Kong, and we saw those sort of demonstrations on the streets and things going badly wrong. And this, I think, gives us a question around this question of resilience. And every time people ask me about social cohesion, I come back to this word of resilience. In the good times, we all get along fine. I mean, this is not a problem. As human beings, we're cooperative animals. It's in our evolutionary history. We cooperate with each other. It's when it gets tested that we really see whether the cohesion is really there, whether the strength and depth is there. And I'm not sure that it is something we are really capturing in these measurements. And of course, how we build that is something not just in Singapore, not just in Southeast Asia. The whole world is struggling with this question at the moment of how we really build resilient ties. Now, we have some indications as to what will help with this, but that's something we all need to work on. Now, if I come down to religion, and we often hear the phrase, religion is important in Asia, and part of what we've done in this is try to make religion more significant than it is in the normal Bertelsmann Stiftung thing, because we're told religion is important in Asia. I'm slightly worried about this, because we're using a colonial Western concept to talk about a colonial Western region. Of course, Southeast Asia is something, and Farish perhaps will talk more about this more, he's the historian of Southeast Asia, is something first the British and, of course, later the Americans created as this sort of middle bit between the East and nothing. It's not a natural area. And equally, religion, as we use this term today, it's something that developed in the West in a particular sort of social and political time, and we use it to talk about the rest of the world. But if we look at Thai Buddhism and its concerns, or Islam in Brunei, or Confucianism in Indonesia, each of these traditions has got very particular political ties, social ties, cultural ties, its own ethics. There's not one thing called religion that sort of maps neatly onto this. So again, we're doing our best with the measurements we've got, but these are not always the best or ideal measures to look and think about this.
Thank you, Paul. I think important point you're making about how social cohesion can rise and fall, it can ebb and flow, and yes, it requires sustained effort and constant tending, which I think the point was made yesterday by the President Taman as well, and by Sultan this morning as well. And the point you're making about the diversity across our region, I think is something that Professor Farish Noor might be able to elaborate on. So let me turn to Farish, please.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to dovetail what Paul has raised earlier. I think the great finding, the utility of a research project like this is that it underscores one very important thing, which is the fact that Southeast Asia is not and has never been a homogeneous region. So what we see, there are many ways we can read the data and interpret the data, but like Paul says, right, it's a snapshot of where we are at the moment. And what this collection of snapshots do is it tells us that every country in Southeast Asia is attempting to address the question of governance in the context of complex societies in its own way. And I think this is hugely important because we are also ASEAN. And I think one of the mistakes that ASEAN did not make from the beginning was to assume a certain universalism where there is a template for all of us to follow. And that's actually saved ASEAN. And I think it says a lot that reports like this are being done by us in Southeast Asia, about Southeast Asia, for Southeast Asians, because it reminds us of the fact that we also need to respect the fact that each of the countries in Southeast Asia will deal with these issues with the tools at hand. And I think that's important. So it starts off on the premise that this is not a universalist claim. We are not heading towards a common goal because we cannot have a common goal. And I don't think we should attempt, people talk about unity. Southeast Asia cannot be a singularity. We've never attempted to create singularity, and I think that's actually dangerous. Yeah? Now, when dealing then with what we are seeing, we look at the landscape today, can I just add a few things? Because of course, this project will continue and there will be other more in-depth, more nuanced surveys done. One factor that we tend to leave out, because political analysts, we look at numbers, we love to crunch numbers and data, but geography. Yeah? And Southeast Asia is actually a very interesting region, because some of the countries, as we saw on the screen just now, some of the countries happen to sit on the ring of fire. And so Indonesia and Philippines, these are countries that are unfortunately visited by natural disasters. Yeah? The Philippines, I'm told, experiences something like 20 plus typhoons and hurricanes every year. Now, when you look at the survey findings, the level of civic mindedness in the Philippines is extraordinarily high. And perhaps we can also take into account these things, that how our natural environment, things like disasters, COVID was both a divisive and unifying factor, and our very geography itself ought to be taken into account, because of course a project like this requires the participation of not only political analysts and historians, but also sociologists, people who study the politics of geography and things like that. So that's one factor. So how then do we measure? Where are these numbers coming from? Where are the numbers coming from? And if there is a high level of civic mindedness in the Philippines, could it be partly because when disasters strike anywhere, states are often not able to react immediately. When your neighbor's house is on fire, you go in first. You don't wait for the state to come. You have to go in first. Or when your village is flooded, you need to come together and do that. And I think that's extraordinary, because it brings us back to yesterday's discussion, when I think some people, myself included, raised the concern about our tendency in this part of the world, particularly among analysts, to often take a very state-centric approach, to assume that states have to do everything for us. The state at best can be a gardener state. It tends the garden. But social cohesion must come from society itself. It has to be organic, it has to be real. And I think that's something worth pursuing in future studies. Yeah? So I think I agree with Paul. I think as a snapshot, it's actually very telling, because it shows us where we are today. And I think we've come actually a long way. But we need to be cautious when we make certain claims like, oh, we are connected by a common history. People always say, oh, we are connected by the common history of colonialism. True and not true. Because if you make that claim, and I'm a historian of colonialism, if we make that claim, we are already assuming that colonialism was a homogeneous process for all of us in Southeast Asia. But that's very different, because the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the Spanish Empire were very different empires with very different modalities of colonialism that then created a host of very different problems that each one of these societies have to deal with. So I've got 10 seconds left. I mean, I think basically what we see is an enormous amount of organic local agency at work. And I think we ought to be appreciative of the fact that, what this does show to us is that on a very ordinary, mundane, day-to-day level, Southeast Asians are actually able to take things, themselves and do things themselves, and that social cohesion, because it's the figures indicate that it's coming organically from society. That's something for us, I think, to be thankful for, if not celebratory.
Right. Well, thank you, Farish. And thank my panelists for keeping to their time and giving their overview thoughts, because that gives us a lot of time to take questions from the floor, and make this a bit more interactive. The point you're making about the diversity across the region, right? And I think it's an important one, and we don't have one formula that applies to everyone. Yeah. But I think one of the big findings, the overview finding, was that across the region, there is a sense that social relations are not in a bad place. 7 in 10 people feel that they're quite comfortable with their communities accepting diversity, respect for others who are not like them. And that is a pretty good outcome, I think. And from the questions I'm getting, and there are lots of questions, and please keep them coming, and I'll try to sort of group them as we go along. One key question is, what are the underlying factors that lead to this positive outcome? Are there factors that apply across the region, or are there factors which are unique to specific countries that we might learn from each other? Farish, you want to start, and then we work our way backwards.
Okay, I'm going to venture a proposition here. I'm not making any general factual claims here, yeah? But we also see a correlation. We see strong civic-mindedness and social cohesion on a popular, ordinary level, but we also see a slight decline in trust, especially towards state institutions.
Yes.
It could be that the two are actually interrelated. As you trust the state less, you depend on yourself more, and you depend on your friends and neighbors and close associates more, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because societies need to be resilient on their own, by themselves. That resilience has to come. It's not like taking vitamin C in the morning. You know? It has to come from yourself. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but I think you also have to remember, this entire region, most of this region, are made up of post-colonial states that are built on the foundations of colonies. Historically, colonies were never democracies, and all colonial powers distrust the natives because you fear native revolt. Yeah? So there's always been this suspicion of people doing things on their own. The fact that a lot of things are actually happening by themselves, you know, on their own in Southeast Asia, and are allowed to, I think points to a certain level of political maturity on the part of the states of Southeast Asia, because in the end you have to trust your public, you have to trust your own citizenry. And if people want to create self-help groups or cooperatives or whatever, I think, like I said, the role of the state is not to micromanage. It should be like a gardener. You let the garden grow, and the state, if it's wise, will then identify what are the opportunity structures it can actually encourage so that these civic bonds, you know, grow stronger in time. Of course, ideally, you'd like to see trust at both vertical and horizontal level, but the fact that there seems to be a deepening of trust along horizontal lines is, I think, a very positive thing.
I'd like to take up that point and present it to all three speakers of the difference we find in the report of very strong horizontal relations, but not so strong sort of vertical relations, that sense of trust in institutions, a sense of fairness, you know, is the system working in my favor? And we also heard that yesterday from the Edelman findings, right? The 61% of the respondents saying the system isn't quite working in my favor. And maybe, Chan Hong, you can touch on that, the difference between the horizontal and the vertical. What explains that?
I guess there's no one singular explanation for the different observations that you can see. But I do agree with Farish, you know, the fact that, you know, it's actually a very diverse region, and each country has their own experience, right? And for most of the countries, the horizontal ties are fairly robust, I would say, compared to other domains. And I think part of that could be the case that, you know, not a shared history, but the fact that we all understand what is at stake.
Yeah.
Right? Having gone through the last 50 years, and, you know, from time to time, yes, you know, you have some sectarian, you know, disagreement, right, in terms of how racial or religious diversity can be managed. But I think by and large, you know, after 50, 60 years, we kind of have this social compact that, hey, you know, we know what is at stake, right? You know, if you don't get together, you know, then, you know, everybody will be affected. And I think that's where, you know, that strong horizontal ties are built. And as far as the vertical, I think there could be different perspective to that or different interpretation depending on where you're looking at. And if you look at the case of Singapore, I mean, Singapore, I think a lot of Singaporeans are very confident, you know, that the government can manage this, you know, diversity with regards to racial or religious diversity very well, and maybe, you know, a bit more complacent, right? And perhaps explain why, you know, that there's a bit of a disconnect. But in other communities, perhaps you have a different set of explanations in terms of that trust and confidence. So I think what is more important is the case that, you know, that horizontal strength did not kind of filter through, you know, to help uplift the focus on common good. So it's not just horizontal and vertical, but also the focus on common good. And this is the part where I think different communities can, you know, explore what are some of the opportunities to come together and play a bigger role, right, in uplifting the common interests.
Paul, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, talking about the lack of sort of the vertical trust there, I think actually Southeast Asia we're seeing quite high trust in global terms. And again, I think perhaps the Edelman's thing sort of talked about this the other day. There's this huge lack of trust in institutions in many places in the West, where it's shrinking sort of quite low. And so comparatively, sort of on this global sense, it's still quite strong here, which I think comes back to these questions of governance we've talked about as a part of this. You know, there is perhaps a sense of a competence in governance, or you know, they're sort of working for the people in different ways. So perhaps, you know, again, we're talking about, you know, these low numbers, but, you know, again, if we look in a bigger picture, it's not looking that bad in various ways. And maybe just to build on the sort of the horizontal sort of thing as well. Again, perhaps sort of comparison to the Western sort of context would be useful there. Because through much of history, Southeast Asia has been relatively harmonious. If you like, the different sort of ethnic groups, the different sort of religious groups as they've come here, they haven't come generally as invaders. So sort of we've had sort of the leaders sort of converted, and that's like to change from Hindu to Buddhist into sort of then sort of Islamic sort of majority sort of countries. It hasn't happened with sort of violence. And of course, in Europe and its borders into sort of the Islamic majority world, we've seen the Crusades and these histories of big empires clashing around these sort of religious ethnic borders. And that simply hasn't happened here. So there's sort of like almost sort of millennia of sort of harmony here. Of course, colonialism kind of interrupted that to some degree, and that's where we see a lot of the violence coming out of that. And of course, as Farish has suggested, the aftermath of that has often been these sort of borders that have come with colonialism. But there is perhaps this underlying sort of sense of harmony built, I said, through, I don't want to say like through the ages, it sounds almost like mystical and stuff, like it's there somehow in the nature of things, which it's not. But there is something here that people have accepted this living together for much longer periods, and it's built again into the society, the histories, the cultures in different ways.
I'd like to take up a point that Farish was making earlier about how shared experiences, you know, whether it's COVID or a natural calamity, does get people working together across state and people sectors, public sectors, and that might engender trust. But is trust necessary to enable them to work together in the first place? You know, which direction does it flow? Without trust, they could be at each other's throats. Yeah. And you need that baseline level of trust so that they can come and work together. So what's your sense? How do you build trust so that you can start working together across state, people, and private sector?
Oh, okay, I think I take your point, but in instances where you have calamities, whether it's a political calamity or a natural disaster, and people turn on each other, I don't think it's simply because of an absence of trust. I think it's also because there is the presence of a kind of me-first survivalist mindset, which I think sadly has become very much hegemonic by now as a result of the kind of consumerist culture that we're seeing all over the planet. So you see this happening, in certain countries. There's a fire in the city, everybody loots. Instead of putting out the fire, everybody loots the shops. Now, is that an absence of trust, or is that a prevalence of a kind of me-first, selfish, Hobbesian, natural man sort of mindset? I think it's both working at the same time. Whether trust comes first or help comes first, that's the chicken and egg. I think you need both. And I think my question is, where is this trust coming from? We do see, the survey indicates that there is trust. So I'm curious as to where that trust comes from. And I think part of the answer goes back to the keynote earlier this morning by Nazrin, right? It's through these very small daily acts. This is Tolstoy. I mean, the daily acts of kindness. This is simply saying good morning to your neighbor establishes a human connection, which, by the way, you cannot do with a state because it's an abstract entity. You don't wake up in the morning and say, hello, state, but you can say hello to your neighbor. So, because of the political economy we live in today, in the age of late post-industrial capitalism, where there's so much alienation and people feeling lost in huge cities, this need for a human bond is important. So back again to the question of the state. What can the state do? Like I said yesterday, no state can force us to love each other. States can't do that. Even if they put a gun to your head, they can't do that. But states can facilitate people who care for each other and sympathize and empathize with one another. And I think to that extent, maybe that's what the states of Southeast Asia got right. Yeah, they correctly identified that, some kinds of social behavior, communal behavior, is actually benevolent, it's good, it's benign, and we can just let it happen by itself, organically. So to go back to your question, which comes first? I think you need both at the same time, but you need the right conditions for that to emerge.
That point you make about it's the everyday action, the smile, the help, that people give, I think was made by President Tharman and also by Sultan Nazrin Shah this morning. And I think it also relates, Chan Hong, to one of the recommendations you make in the report, or the group makes in the report, about whether it's possible to use the strong horizontal ties to sort of reinforce the vertical ties, which are not so strong. Tell us about that recommendation,
Sure.
how you see that playing out.
Sure. I guess if you look at the two perspective on horizontal and vertical, you get away with the assumption that it's just between the two groups. It's two kind of extreme end of the spectrum. But I think there's a lot more that's going on behind that. And the idea is to have policymakers or different communities to engage and to have in the dialogue, to understand where are some of the challenges, and for policymakers to kind of reach out to them and to harness their strength, their understanding of the ground, right, so that they can make and calibrate better policies and interventions. And I think for many of the civic organizations as well as religious bodies, they are the ones who are most familiar with what's happening on the ground. And being able to reach out to them and get them as partners, it will send a very powerful signal to suggest that they're all in this together.
I mean, it relates to, I think, what was said at the previous session by Mr. Peter Ho about that multi-stakeholder work, right? Working across people, public and private sectors and coming together on that social compact. And that's what you're referring to.
It's really about giving a signal, telling everyone that, hey, you know what, we're all in this boat together, right? I mean, Sultan talked about the sail and the wind, but at the end of the day, all of us are on the same boat. Right? And I think this is the part that perhaps at this point, in some societies, in some communities, that idea is not quite aligned, right? And I think some may feel that there's a huge gap between what the policymakers think versus what the civic societies feel. And if both can come together and have this conversation and try to understand what are some of the perspective coming from each, then I think there's a lot more room, right, for the different communities to work together and to see that at the end of the day, we are really on the same boat and we're on the sail and we're trying to catch the next wind. And I think that's a part that probably will contribute, right, to fostering the trust, the vertical ties, and at the same time, also enable different communities, be that different races or different religious groups, to have a better appreciation of the dynamics.
I'm getting lots of questions about the challenges that might be posed to social cohesion, because this is a snapshot at this point in time. But as we heard in the previous session, there are many challenges coming at us, not to mention, least of all, AI, right? And fake news and misinformation. And I was struck by the reference to how there will be 10 billion people, but 100 billion AI agents, which we'll have to deal with. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think what impact that might have on social cohesion in this region. And if we look at a snapshot, a study of this sort 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think the impact will be, and how do we sort of mitigate some of those risks? Who wants to start? Paul?
Yeah, maybe I can start on this. I have to say I'm not an optimist about our current situation in the world. If there are some bright spots, one of them is perhaps I think there's now a greater understanding of the need for regulation of social media and AI, and various countries are sort of moving towards this, because we've had this model of the free market out there, that we just let these things happen and somehow the free market will ensure that everything is best. And it's quite obvious now the free market is not a good idea. It does not work in the best interest of people. It often works against our best interests, particularly as these things become sort of monetized in various ways. So the fact that now I think governments, particularly Europe, I think is very clear on this. In Southeast Asia as well, we're seeing this here. So various parts of the world are moving, I think, quite heavily towards this. And of course, it will take international cooperation because of the connectedness. No one country can do this on their own. Again, I think President Farman mentioned this, so that's a key part of this. I think also perhaps, if you like, our current sort of system as part of this, because we've been talking about this question of sort of the grievances out there, and there's 61% of people across the world who have a sense of sort of grievance. Partly, I think, yes, there's a worry about this, the fact that there are so many people who have a grievance about this. But there's also actually something we can see as quite optimistic about this, because we live in a world that's dominated by a form of imperialistic neoliberal capitalism that is often is working for the elites and is not worth. Sense of grievance is a positive thing, that we might have that energy to push back against this. So while I said I'm not optimistic, I think there are sort of some things out there which might give us grounds to say, well, now we're identifying these problems, this can lead us on as to where sort of between policy makers, with civil society, with the public, we can work together to seek to do something better.
Any thoughts, Farish? Just to add to Paul, and I'm even more pessimistic, if I can start with an anecdote. I think the saddest thing I've seen in my entire life was when I was in Japan in a university, and with my colleagues in the canteen, I saw a young man talking to what I thought was his girlfriend on his phone. It was a very animated conversation, and I said to my colleagues, he's very much in love, this young man. And then they said, Farish, he's talking to an app. And I thought that was so profoundly sad, that this young man in his 20s was no longer capable of having a conversation with an actual human being. So we are looking at the state of human, cohesion between human beings, and how it develops organically. You may hate your neighbor because you don't like the food he cooks, or his karaoke is too loud or whatever. But if his house is on fire, you can't switch off. You will do something. But we are looking at a genuine generational change, where an entire generation of young human beings are being nurtured in a different way, where their communication in this is less personal. You have to deal with actual complex human beings who have facets that you may like or not like, but in the end, that's how we build meaningful relationships and friendships. So my concern, if we were to do the survey 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, as this younger generation proliferate, in numbers, are we going to see changes? Because this cohesion that we are seeing now, that is horizontal, is clearly between human agents. But when AI comes in, and so much of what's happening now in my world, in academia, is being dominated by artificial intelligence, will these human bonds become more brittle, more weak, and more superficial? Now, when that happens, coupled with the distrust, or the decline in trust for institutions and states, now that's not a happy picture. That's not where we want to go. So I think it's very important that we take the implications of AI very, very seriously. Because of course, fake news is a threat, and propaganda and all that. We know that. But at the more mundane level, like I said, if our interaction is no longer on a person-to-person, community-to-community basis, where we have to actually work out our differences. You don't have to work out your differences with an artificial girlfriend, because you can program her to accept whatever you say, right? And that's dangerous. And that's like video games that today are designed to make sure you can only win. That's how the video game industry works. You can't lose, because it's giving you the dopamine hit. And that basically means we're looking at a younger generation that's hooked up, that's hooked on, this constant positive affirmation, regardless of consequences, regardless of your own subject position. And I think that's not a happy place. Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see the survey being repeated, in the years to come. Because if we start seeing a shift, then there might be some truth to what Paul and I have been saying.
Chanuk, what's your sense?
When we were doing this study, we actually reached out to a few social media giants to find out about the profile and the users and so on. And we were told that Southeast Asia is actually the largest consumer of social media platforms. Yeah. And I think that's quite true, because I think sometimes it's faster to get a response from them via Facebook than via the email that we send them. So that tells us a bit about the nature and the kind of consumption habits. But more importantly, I think this is the part where, when it comes to technology and digitalization, a lot of that can come to the, how you regulate that platforms, to ensure that, that is one that will not affect the social fabric. But I think more importantly is also how we engage the public, right, to raise the public awareness on how all these social media platforms will shape the kind of behaviors, the rituals. And going back to Farish's point, I mean, indeed, whether there are cases where you have more and more people who are talking to the robots as opposed to talking to real people, and how would you ensure that, the algorithms, the AI, the large language model, do not have a corrosive element attached to that will affect the social fabric. And those are some of the emerging challenges that we have to deal with, and to ensure that even as the way we engage different communities evolve, there are mechanisms in place, be that policies that regulate some of the social media giants, or to raise that horizontal strength, the awareness among people on what are some of the dangers, right, when you on social media platforms.
Well, I think rather than being pessimistic, we can take the advice from the earlier speakers of invoking Dolly Parton and recognizing that we can't change the wind, but we can shift our sails. So to be nimble and agile in adjusting to those changes, as you say. There's a question that's directed specifically to you, Chan Hong, which is the point you were trying to make about the diversity across our region and the difference, in systems and politics, and how it's more about governance rather than the type of system that it determines social cohesion. So maybe you could elaborate on that.
Absolutely. When you look at the scores of all 10 countries and then you try to map it with other indicators of stability, of governance, and governance performance and effectiveness, I think what you do see here is that it's not so much about that so-called institutional systems that you have in place, but really about the quality of the governance. Right? Whether the policies that you have ensure that different groups are treated fairly, whether they have access to the resources, and I think those are the things that really matter, because at the end of the day, I think most people, ordinary citizens, are more concerned about the bread and butter issues to ensure that they have the resources, the opportunities, and less so on what will be the formal political systems that you have. And I think those are important when we consider the idea of cohesion, because that civil liberties alone doesn't necessarily guarantee that you have mutual respect. It doesn't guarantee that you have access to opportunities and resources. And when we talk about social cohesion, I think that's where we really need to look at the region and the unique context that we share, right? When we consider what are some of the factors that will shape our cohesive norms.
The previous session, we had a very nice analogy of oasis rather than fortifications, right? And the oasis is a place where there are rules, but people get to shape those rules. And that's about civic participation and governance as well, where people come together to shape the outcomes, I suppose.
It's about opportunities to flourish.
Yes. Farish, you look like you want to say something to that.
I wanted to add to that. I think another thing that the survey shows is that there's no correlation between wealth and civic participation and harmony either. I think that's very, very important. It's very important because in academic circles, it actually challenges, if not refutes, one unstated assumption in development theory. Like, so you develop, you become rich, you get money, you shop until you die happy, right? And that doesn't happen. And Southeast Asia seems to show that actually it's not your GDP, it's not your yearly income that actually guarantees this. It's other things. It's these intangibles that, okay, I sound like a Hallmark postcard now, but these are things that money can't buy. But it is literally that. It's that smile from your colleague, it's that wave from your neighbor. And these things, I mean, we tend to sweep this aside because we've all become jaded and cynical and all that, but these things actually do matter. And to go back to the point earlier about a virtual existence, a thumbs up on your WhatsApp is not the same thing, right? It's not an actual handshake. And I think this is something that is very important. We've lost our tactile memory, and people can go on for days without actually shaking the hand of another human being, or actually going to the fence, having an actual chat with your neighbor. And I think when that happens, that's when we need to get worried, you know. But the point about the absence of a correlation between wealth and cohesiveness, I think is important. Because it also means that you may not be doing well economically as a country, but you don't have to give up, because your social bonds might actually be stronger than you realize.
Well, I mean, but governance is also at multiple levels, right? It's not just the state. It's and individuals, as employers, as colleagues, we have agency, right? The finding yesterday from the Edelman report, which said 20% did not want to work with or live with people who were different from them. And I think, but as an individual, as an employer, as a colleague, we can make a difference by showing that we are accepting of diversity and inclusiveness, and we want our workplaces and our societies and our communities to be a very different kind of place, which is socially inclusive. So I think we can make a difference. We're kind of running out of time, and I'm conscious that we have to maintain social cohesion and harmony by making sure you have your lunch. So I'm going to wrap things up by asking my panelists, out of the many thoughts and ideas and findings, can you pick one? Out of many, just one. In a phrase, in a word, in a thought, in a finding, that what is it you would take away from this year's social cohesion report that you would like to share with this audience, or that you would apply in your own space? Start with Farish, and then we'll give Chan Hung the last word.
I'm not ready. I think as someone who studies Southeast Asia, I think what the report really reminds us, and it needs to be said again and again and again, that as Paul said, Southeast Asia is an unnatural construct. There's no particular reason that the countries of the region ought to think of themselves as a region. But what the report does show is that within this region, you know, we actually see very real diversity that makes it imperative on us to be cautious, I think, of making these kind of universal, you know, claims. I'm glad, like I said, I'm glad that we are not attempting to create any kind of universal model or template for the whole region. And I don't think we should ever do that, because that will be actually more detrimental than helpful.
Paul?
I'd like to pick up on something that's been mentioned already, the fact that it's not money, it's not modernity that is leading to this sort of social cohesion. This doesn't give you happiness. In this, again, a lot of development theory does this, and again, a lot of the studies, particularly in the West, of social cohesion, it looks like this. The more money you have, the happier you have. But again, like, you know, in the good times, yes, people are doing well, and that doesn't really tell us that much. But of course, a lot of sort of modernity, there's individualism built into this as well, and that's breaking away those bonds, as far as like people are going back into their houses. So the richer, the more modern, the more westernized we become in various ways, it actually can be quite harmful to this. And we're seeing on the top of this some of the countries like the former communist countries, which are much more cohesive in many ways, and we haven't really mentioned that, actually do score extremely well, and that's what I think is quite interesting for us.
Chan Hung, you have the last word with 46 seconds to go. Yes.
Thank you. We pour through many indicators, you know, looking at the 10 ASEAN countries, and there are a lot of differences. But I think the key takeaway for me is that in spite of all those differences, it doesn't necessarily mean that societies will be divided or polarized. I think what's more important is to have that social compact between the different communities, to understand that, you know, we've gone through a long journey. No doubt from time to time there might be some differences, but at the end of the day, you know, we all understand, you know, what is good for all of us. And I think this is a part that to me is particularly, you know, heartening, because it's an important takeaway to know that this region has gone through so much in the past, and there's so much to look forward to. And the next 10, 20 years is really how can we fine-tune that, you know, to foster stronger trust, institutional trust, and where are some of the areas where you can encourage different communities to step forward and to contribute and make a difference.
You sound like you're ready to start working on the next report.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, please download the full report from the QR code and study it. And as Chan Hung said, we are eager to sort of partner with people to sort of develop it and take the study forward. But please join me in thanking my panelists for that.
And thank you, Mr. Warren Fernandez, for moderating. Gentlemen, may I invite you to take a step forward for a group photo, please? Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, as Mr. Fernandez had mentioned, please do download the detailed report of the study. The QR code can be found outside, which is at the RSIS publication booth, which is right next to the LED wall.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be adjourning to lunch very soon, but of course we'd like to give you a little bit more information for your after lunch appointments, and that of course would be your breakout sessions and your workshops as well. So again, do refer to your name badge for your allocated sessions as well. Ushers will be on hand to guide you to the various rooms. Just for you to know, Breakout 4 will be here, right here in this ballroom. Breakout 5, please proceed to the Olivia room. Breakout 6, to the Sophia room. Workshops now. Workshop 1 will be at Indiana Minto room. Workshop 2 at the Morrison room. Workshop 3 at the Moore, M-O-O-R room. Workshop 4 will be at the Mercury Enterprise room. Workshop 5 will be at the Hullett room.
And ladies and gentlemen, here's quickly what to expect for tomorrow. We continue to put more meat on the skeleton, so to speak. Day 2 was very, very interesting for me. And here's what to expect. We want to listen. We want to hear from the young people tomorrow. We do have a fireside chat with young community leaders that will be moderated by Dr. Aaron Maniam. But more importantly, there's the third pillar that we will be focusing on, which is forging societal resilience. That panel will be moderated by Professor Mona Siddiqui. And to close off the conference, Singapore's Minister for Law and Second Minister for Home Affairs, Mr. Edwin Tong, will be presenting a closing address. So plenty to look forward to. Let's see now, do you have a QR code? You can scan the QR code on the back of your badges to see what's coming up tomorrow. Thank you for your patience, and as Ravi said, lunch will be served shortly.
All right, some details with regards to lunch as well, ladies and gentlemen. Again, for those of you having your vegetarian and kosher meals, we have dedicated lines for you. For the rest of us, I certainly hope we can have them that space to be able to enjoy their special dietary requirements. And not to forget the Cohesion Cafe that's open throughout the entire day. Today, we celebrate another national drink called Longan and pineapple drinks right there for you as well. So please go there and enjoy those local delights. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the halfway mark of the conference. We'd like to hear from you. You see the QR code at this time. Just take a moment, please. Scan the QR code and let us know your thoughts. It's been great for Diana and I thus far. Tomorrow is going to be another exciting program, as Diana has mentioned, but we'd like to hear your thoughts at the halfway mark of the conference. Share your thoughts only to make ICCS for the years to come even better. Shall not say more. We'll leave you to enjoy your lunch. Bon appetit and see you soon. Thank you.